Hello, welcome to Polyglot World Languages, a podcast where we talk about languages from around the world. Today, we will be speaking about the isiShalambombo language. This introduction is harder than usual because phonetically it's hard to pronounce everything I have to say, so I'm going to try my best. Our guest today is Pule Pule Gajanolint.
That was great. Especially the Pule. The Pule was great. I like the adjective.
Yeah. And who is also involved in the, here we go, isibek. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Isibek. Oh, yeah. Sorry, there's a breathy voice. Isibek.
Yeah, it's bad.
Isibek. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sure.
The isibek. Oh, yeah. So shambu. Script, which is used in South Africa. We'll be speaking a lot about that script also, but in the name of the theme of this podcast, we had to choose a language, so we chose isiShalambombo, which also is called isiShala. I'm very, very happy to have Pule on the show. This is actually our first time recording also together with someone in my house.
Oh,
so
nice.
welcome.
Kamaku, ndiyabulela. Ndiyaqama ugusha ngithi ngimi nguPule kaJanoleshi. Mina ngubhokote bovuka amagayisa waginqa zonke isihlahla. Ngiyaqama ugusha uba khona. Ngiyabonga bhuti. Yebo.
Thank you. Could you tell us what you just said?
I just introduced myself according to traditional verses of my clan and family. And then I just said, Ngiyaqama ugusha. And uqama ugusha means to, it's like an invocation. It's a way of giving thanks. It's like an ancestral invocation. And it literally means, if we look at the etymology, the givers of water. It comes from Kwemana languages. And the word for water in Kwemana languages is tam. And kamaku means, ma means give. Kamaku, water, give, and then the masculine plural. So the givers of water. So it transformed into tamaku, which is very common in this Francophone context in this extreme south of South Africa. But in general, we use this as an invocation because it's remember, water is the primary source, so we are all subject to the agency of water. Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of different stuff I'd love to talk about with Pule. Hopefully we get to speak about a lot of it. As I'm not a speaker of any click languages, so I was trying my best with this introduction. So maybe we'll start from talking a bit about isiShalambombo, which was the topic of your PhD.
I'm still completing it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, is the topic of your PhD.
Yeah.
So, and then you mentioned to me before we start recording that this is a type of effugiolexis. So we'll have to get into what that is about as well. Could you tell us a bit about isiShala?
isiShala or Shalambombo. This is what we might call secret language, or it is the language of the underworld, or the language of, in maybe Michael Halliday's terms, the anti-language. Language that comes from an anti-society, which is a society that is positioned in opposition to the parallel, but in opposition to the dominant norms of society. So in many contexts of colonial modernity, you have a situation where there is an outer class, a class of those who reject the labor system and who find other ways of meandering the interstices of urbanity and urban life. And I think, for example, in Ireland, there used to be a secret language that became the traveler's language. In different places around the world, there's certain what we sometimes call urban youth languages, but it's kind of a vague and unspecific term. Really, it's this sort of like anti-language, is this parallel to language, the shadow of language that actually allows people to escape into the darkness of the opaque.
Well, it's opaque to the outsiders, but presumably there's an in-group.
Yeah.
Considers this something like a sign that you're in the in-group, or?
Yeah. So the in-group is always going deeper. So you always have an in-group of an in-group of an in-group of an in-group of an in-group.
Right.
And that's kind of the structure of the creativity of it. Once something becomes known, then you have to make it unknown again. And it's this kind of philosophy of what one of my interview participants said to me. rastabogisa. We make the language run away from you.
Oh,
Yeah. That's the
is there a specific demographic in terms of things like age or location for this?
You know, I found in my research old grannies by at the age of 80 something understanding a version of isiShala, which we would call isdando, in a particular township in a city in the southeast of South Africa called Pietermaritzburg or Ngungundlovu. There's a place called Sobantu, and I'm confusing the two. In Durban, there's a township called Lamontville, and in Lamontville or Laxi, there's a certain secret language that's specific to that location, and that's called isdando. And I found even like elderly people knowing that thing, but it's street language. It's language of that is outside the terms of propriety, consciously, very, very intentionally outside of the terms of propriety.
So, and I understand this is in South Africa, but presume it may not be all of South Africa, or it may also be some other countries around there that have some.
In everywhere in the world, you have something like this.
Oh, but I mean, okay, so that's effugiolexis, but I mean specifically for
isiShalambombo. So I think isiShalambombo really, okay, so if I do a quick breakdown of the morphology of the word, isi is what we call a class 7 prefix, and it has to do most languages, the name of the language has this prefix isi, but essentially isi doesn't refer to language, it refers to a manner of doing.
Right.
So even I can say, even if I say the stash way of doing something, I say stash.
Do you know what? There's in Georgian, which I just never stopped talking about because I love Georgian.
Yeah.
But Georgian has a case, like a noun case, called the adverbial. So I suppose it's the same. I suppose it's kind of like li is in English, but it's cool to think of it as a case, like nominative, accusative, genitive, and then you got this one adverbial. So and it's ad. So to say that you speak Georgian, you say kartulad, which means Georgian li.
Georgian li, exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of similar to that.
And so then the rest of the word is a compound word. It's shala mbombo or mbumbu, which in full could be mbumbulu, and ukshala zisa. Right? So these are verbs. Well, the first one is a verb. The second one is like an adjective, maybe. And ukshala zisa. This is according to my research. I don't think there's literature that specifies this, but according to my context and, the reasonable supposition from what has been said, ukshala zisa means to evade. Ukshala zisa to slide away. Ngembumbulu with a counterfeit, with a fake. So it's like
slide away with a counterfeit.
Yeah,
you doing things in the manner of sliding away with a counterfeit.
Yeah, sliding away by means of a counterfeit. In other words, you're throwing up something that sounds like language that people hear, but they can't hear it.
Yeah.
So it's a dummy. You put some dummy in front of you, as you go behind the back, you're gone. Well, we actually call it punyogabempete, which means the one who squeezes out when they've got him, like
really? Like an eel.
Yeah.
Trying to put handcuffs on an eel.
Squeeze out, like the cops have got you. You dodge them. You went through a double up. You went,
Yeah.
So it's all about evading. I would say it's evading capture in a very I tried to make the point that in a philosophical sense, it's evading capture.
Okay.
Evading the capture of being legible, of being legible, systemically legible, as a tactic. A tactic of survival and creativity. A creative tactic in a system of domination is to be illegible, and I think that's basically the philosophy of isiShala, is to be illegible.
Is there a bit of like harsh voice or something on shala?
isiShala. Yeah, I think in general a lot of our vowels have, especially when there's a voiced consonant. What happens is the voice consonant actually creates breathy voice, and then the vowel gets breathy voice, and that actually also is what we call a tone depressor. So that's one of the phonological eccentricities of the region, is that there's a lot of depressor consonants, which actually, because they have breathy voice, like b, like it's b, it depresses the tone.
Yeah, this is the challenge for me today. Is all of this phonetics is harder than what I normally, or like a bit outside of what I normally have to deal with. But I suppose for the sort of slightly more I don't know, less for the more general public type of listener.
Sure.
To just explain what voicing is like this. So it's like the same vowel. You can say like you can say it like this, or you can say it like this, or you can.
Yeah.
And this is called. So you got things like breathy voice, and then you got things like
That's the as opposed to
yeah. And this actually in some languages, in some places linguistically, it's a part of the phoneme. You actually need to say it this way for it to be the correct word. So in this case, it sounds like isiShala is sort of like that, and then you got.
Shala. But I don't know if that's maybe I'm actually affecting that a bit because it is like a general phonological tendency. I think you can pronounce this shala without it's shala. It's not isiShala, you know.
Okay.
But when it's a voiced consonant, it becomes that breathy voiced vowel as well. And as you say, it can be. There are in certain language traditions there are minimal pairs like that, like Xitsonga. Like you have a difference between mala and mala.
And those are two different words, only differing in the breathiness of
the breathiness of the consonant and vowel.
Yeah.
Mala.
Yeah.
You know, or miri.
Those are two words.
Yeah. Miri.
Yeah.
Miri. Miri. You can hear the difference.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, let's going back to effugiolexis and isiShala.
Yeah, isiShalambombo.
So, when you started this research, did you speak any of this?
So what happened to me was that my background is actually in the performing arts. So I was in I'm a hip hop I'm a hip hop head from way back, and I went to theater school, and at some point I started to study linguistics, and I had to I was using linguistics to learn how to rap better.
Well, there's a lot of that's why you're so into phonetics, right? Because you like all your adjectives and your.
So the situation is this: I wanted to rap like, I don't know if you know hip hop canon, but I used to love Big Daddy Kane.
Okay.
The MC called Big Daddy Kane from Brooklyn, New York, and Big Daddy Kane, I liked his flow. In other words, the rhythm of his raps. But I wanted to rap like Big Daddy Kane, but in our languages, like Zulu or ngestamto. Stamto is another word for a more popular version of isiShalambombo, I would say. There's a lot of different words, because it's language practice of evasion.
The name has to change.
The name changes, but also like nobody knows, like nobody agrees on what that is. Like I'm already saying someone's going to disagree with my definition of these things.
Right.
Already, like, because some people will say Shalambombo is something. Umbombo, it's an ideophone or whatever. There's so many different theories about this. But I'm pretty confident that I've got a good explanation that I've written down in my thing. But in any case, wait, hold on, where were we? What was
you were talking about how you were really into hip hop and you wanted to.
So I wanted to rap like Big Daddy Kane. But the thing is, with English, I mean, I'm sure you're well aware that English uses stress as to change like topic, and you can change stress on any word, and that changes what slightly what is the contextual meaning of the sentence. So I can say the microphone is on the table. 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 All of those things contextually mean something slightly different, but I can stress any word. So rhythmically, that's very useful because now I can really create there's a lot of flexibility rhythmically with rapping in English, for example. In our languages at home, like isiZulu, for example, or whatever, Sintu languages, because our languages are so interlinked that I wouldn't even like to distinguish them. But if we are going to give a name for people to check, is Zulu for Zulu language, for example, among other so-called Nguni languages, Isimbo languages, and Sotho-Tswana languages, all the southern Ntu languages, Sintu languages. There is this property of penultimate lengthening. At the end of a phonological phrase, if the last vowel is twice the length. So even
that's like your surname.
Exactly. Pule Gachano Lynch.
Lynch. Yeah.
Lynch, it's long.
Yeah.
So isibheke, it's twice long.
Yeah.
And that pattern is very pervasive. In fact, I would understand it as the psycholinguistic function. It's in order to help people, to help us pass phonological phrases. You see one to the other because there's...
You know, Polish does almost this.
Oh, yeah?
Polish, it doesn't do vowel lengthening because it doesn't have long vowels, but the stress is always, except for a small number of exceptions, which are usually loan words, the stress is always on the second last syllable.
Yeah, there we go.
So it's like my name's Stanisław Pstrokoński, right? It's not like in Russian it'd be Stanislav.
Yeah.
Because that like sort of old Slavic thing would be Stanislav.
Yeah.
But in Polish it's Stanisław because you always have to have the second. Yeah.
Stanisław, yeah.
Yeah. Like
so
this.
That's how we do it. So, Stanisław.
But you'd lengthen it, right?
Yeah.
Hang on.
Stanisław. That's how we call you. Stanisław. Now Stanisław. That's
Nice,
exactly.
nice, yeah.
So it's actually similar. And I guess Spanish and Italian also have that kind of rhythmic pattern as well.
Spanish has a lot of like final, like, you know, things that end in tion, like shun in English. You would tend to say like acción for action, right?
Yeah, but that one, because it's only 2 syllables, is not the best example. Like,
yeah, it's a bit more mobile in Spanish, but in Polish it's like a very strict rule. So it sounds like it's a fairly consistent thing also in isiZulu. Is it okay to call it Zulu in English, or should we actually say isiZulu in English?
If you say the Zulu is a person's name, there was an actual person who lived called Zulu.
Oh, I see.
It was his name.
Okay.
So now when you say Zulu, it's like you're saying, are we talking stash? You know, it's slightly, it doesn't make sense idiomatically in our languages, but it is the common normal way of saying it. So I would say, as I say Zulu language, or you say isiZulu. And isiZulu doesn't mean just language. It means the Zulu way of doing stuff.
Right.
So there's a way of sitting in isiZulu. There's a way of drinking in isiZulu. There's a way of thinking in isiZulu.
That actually brings together the idea of culture and language in a way that's quite natural. Where it feels like in a lot of the time in English, there's like this explanation people have to make of like, by the way, language has culture.
Yeah.
People need that explained. Whereas I don't think they need it in this context where you have this word that just means doing things in a Zulu way. Yeah,
it is culture. I mean, I think that's the thing as well. A lot of the work that we do in like, I'm enrolled at the University of Cape Town, and I think the linguistics department there is it's full of radical sociolinguists, and I think very much a feeling among us is that like we really need to really review what is this ontology of language and languages. We really need to review our distinctions and our conceptualization of what is language, what is a language. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, decentering a kind of maybe I could even say a Western norm of unitizing languages and saying a language is an object. A language is a practice. A language is a relation. Language is relation. It's not an object. You can study like particular objects in language, you know, perhaps even if they're abstracted in terms of, you know, linguistics, phonemes and morphemes or whatever, that you can see those as objects and study them. But language itself is a practice. It's a relation. It's a, you know, it is discursive in a sense of creation of identity. You know, like we talk about Ubuntu philosophy in Southern Africa, and Ubuntu philosophy is often like misconstrued as like just being kind and nice to everyone type of thing. But like Ubuntu really, in my opinion, it's quite a hardcore philosophy of relational ontology. It's that in order for anything to exist, there needs to be a relation.
You know, you opened like 6 cans of worms in one sentence.
I'm sorry, man.
No, it's good. It's just I kind of want to remember what the cans of worms are. No, but like, so one thing I want to say is that this is just, because I didn't actually introduce you very much. I didn't say like, because actually, I mean, one thing I should mention is that Pule is currently a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge, working with Pippa Steele, who maybe one day we'll have on here. I'd love to have Pippa Steele on here as well.
Come through.
Hey, Pippa. She should. Hey, Pippa, come. But yeah, so that's one thing. And then, you know, there are other things that, there's just lots that I'm really quite excited to talk about with you today and
Yeah.
for everyone to hear about.
Yeah.
Some of this is from conversations we had before, and one of them is this thing about like the idea of, is it like, how far is it sensible to define what a language is with by sort of drawing a circle around it and saying like, here it is, and this one's separate. And you got, especially coming from, I mean, I think it has a degree of universality, but I think specifically it seems to be very clear in the South African context where that's just not so applicable, or it's not. And in fact, you've said that that has some negative consequences. You've mentioned that to me before.
Yeah, it's because of our history, the history of apartheid and the like severe obsession with divisive bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy of, people in the world probably know racial division, but they don't realize the extent of ethnicized division in South Africa. That was the apartheid policy par excellence, It was like creating these essentially so-called native reservations that became called the native homelands and popularly known as the Bantustans, that each had a certain language associated with it,
Right.
and therefore a certain identity, a certain culture. And there was a sort of blanket forcing of a very complex and sort of multifarious forms of identity that were all forced into these little neat colored boxes. And it was a violent system because people were removed from where they were living, by the state, by the police, to take them to the place where they, according to their linguistic association, that's where they're supposed to live.
That sounds quite dystopian, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Look, I think
Although I say it sounds dystopian, but actually something not too dissimilar happened in Europe.
Look, it's a European principle at the end of the day. Well, let me say it's like a colonial principle of the nation state ideology of European modernity. Let's say it like that. And a lot of the stuff also was learned from the USA. A lot of South Africa's approach to how to deal with the so-called native problem, in inverted commas. They learned their practices from the way it was done in the US.
What a place to learn from.
I mean, I'll stand to be corrected on the historiography of that, but I think that's well known that this apartheid government was well, versed, in those practices, and so that's the thing that was brought into law in South Africa, and you created a sort of like a majority underclass of the excluded from citizenry because they were given these sort of pseudo states. And now, now as a person who's classified black by the state, you now are part of a pseudo state that you're not a South African. And then you are required to carry a pass, like a passport, but they used to call it a dumb pass, where you must now bring that if you need to come and work in South Africa. And you can, and it's a form of like, state control. It's like a normal fascist system of control, where you must carry this pass and you need to have the correct documentation and you can be removed at any time, from South Africa. So there is and I say this to say that there is a system of institutionalized violence from which we have a legacy in South Africa today, which is also linguistic and cultural. Where we have these divisions of our official languages that essentially were associated with this practice of Bantustanism, of the apartheid separate development policies. And we have not yet addressed that fully in South Africa. There are popular movements to like start saying, no, what about these language practices that were never official, which always get grouped under, some of the official languages. And there is a reactionary pushback against that by those who want to conserve the status of our official languages. But I think in general, there is definitely a debate happening in South Africa at the moment, that has gained steam, where we are like questioning, this supposed utopian multilingualism of 12 official languages, whereas those languages, for the most part, are actually just remnants of the apartheid system.
So that last thing, I'd like to, this is going to be so. It was very foreign to me when I first heard it. I still think I'm getting my head around it.
Yeah.
I think 90% of listeners, unless 90% of listeners are from South Africa, but 90% of listeners probably need a real breakdown of the idea that you're putting forward with that, especially with that final sentence. So this idea that the fact that there are a number, like, did you say 12?
There are 12 official languages.
Official languages. This is actually basically the idea that this is a bad thing. The idea that this is a bad thing, even, right? Because so from what I understand, part of what I understood so far from our conversation so far about this is that by separating isiZulu from, and I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, but isiXhosa and isiNdebele and all the other Bantu languages that are spoken in that region, and putting sort of hard boundaries between them.
In fact, we wouldn't say Bantu languages from an activist perspective, because the word Bantu is associated with a racial classification under apartheid.
Okay, so excuse me for that.
No, it's fine. I mean, it is the commonly used term. It's like, this is the kind of thing. There's a status quo in scholarship. There's a status quo in popular parlance. But that status quo, few people realize that there is an embedded violence in that thing, in the terminology, and that embedded violence needs questioning. So for me, it's like a positive and a joyful thing to always question this kind of terminology.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm this is what part of what you're here for, is to explain to people this perspective and these, what's going on, because I in no way am I have no special knowledge about South Africa and Yuzu, so I'm really, very happy to hear all of this.
No, I know but it is just a contentious thing, because there is an established terminology. And then now you must come and say, we don't accept that. So then people think you're trying to rock the boat. No, we're just being honest about the history of this thing that is sort of like treated as if it's neutral, and it's not. It doesn't have a history of violence inside it, and it does, and we can't avoid that.
So as I understood it so far, and I'm sure you can expand on what my understanding is, or provide a better explanation. But as I understand it so far, part of the problem is the idea that these languages aren't clearly distinct from each other in a way that you can just draw a line and say Zulu is here and isiZulu is here and isiNdebele is over here, or something.
Yeah, but I think it's deeper than that. I think it's a sense that even the concept of a language and an individualized language, it's a social construct, and it's a social construct that has a top-down order to it. Because essentially it's something that is given from above. It's given by the state or some sort of institutional authority. And it goes hand in hand with the principle of standardization, which is essentially the documenting and freezing of linguistic forms in the abstract as a status quo,
I can't get away from Ian McGilchrist. Like, it's just... So we were at a conference together recently. This is actually, so for some background, Pule and I know each other from an online forum talking about scripts and alphabets.
Yeah.
So that's from the Endangered Alphabets Project.
Yeah.
So we basically chatted online until one day we had a conference in Cambridge, and then we met at the conference because Pule is a visiting fellow in Cambridge, and why am I mentioning this now? I forgot what I was talking about. So at this conference, there's a guy called Tim Brooks, who I've mentioned before on the podcast. But Tim Brooks is kind of the person who started and initially kind of pushed forward this idea of the variety of scripts in the world, the Endangered Alphabets Project, the variety of scripts in the world, and what it means really to write, and how it's understudied kind of, and people need to understand better the importance of writing. We are going to get onto that as well, because that's very important. I mean, you're even wearing the T-shirt for it. So for those who are going via audio, Pule has some writing you've probably never seen before using triangles. So we'll get more into this triangle writing shortly. Just showing everyone. So while we were there, then Tim Brooks had he was sort of sharing this idea about the alphabet versus the beta verse, and he was basically saying how when we normally think of the alphabet, we think of it as abstractified Like there's only one letter A fundamentally. There's only one letter B, and there's no kind of variety. And he was saying that actually every time you write the letter B or you use a different font or whatever, like or handwritten in particular, he's more focused on handwriting here. Then it's unique in every time you do it. And so this idea of abstractifying writing down to its sort of kind of thinking that it is only the abstract representation is losing something. And this brought me to so this is a rather long segue, but I'm getting there. This brought me to the ideas of Ian McGilchrist in his book. His book is The Master and His Emissary. Oh, here it is. I just got it behind me. This was not planned, but I got The Master and His Emissary on my bookshelf. Anyway, so I'm just showing it on the screen. Nice. Right, so The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist is a book about... so the second half is about history, and I'm not actually such a fan of the second half. But the first half is about neuroscience, and it totally changed my world. It changed my worldview completely. So he talks about the left and right hemispheres, brain lateralization. So left and right hemispheres of the brain, and he says how this was a topic nobody would touch in neuroscience for many years because it was associated with a certain kind of stigma of like popular science over indexing or like over explaining things away or whatever, using language is a left brain thing and art is a right brain thing. And in fact, every time you do any kind of activity, you use both hemispheres. So it's not something that is that you can simply divide categorically activities into left or right brain. However, the amount of research that's gone into this in neuroscience is now quite a lot, and he kind of wrote this book saying nobody wants to touch this, but I think there's something here. And he was saying how basically there's two ways of attending or two ways of viewing the world, and that we both have them inside. We have both inside us because everyone has two hemispheres to their brain, but they're two really different ways. And he thinks that the world is kind of imbalanced towards the left side. So and the left side is about things like abstraction, linear thinking that you know everything already. There's nothing more to find out. Mapping things onto things you already know, categorizing things. Whereas the right side of the brain is more about what is currently in front of you right now, this unique moment, this unique individual, the exact features of the thing that you're looking at, realizing that you don't know everything, you may not be able to fit it inside a category, noticing the novelty inside something, and sort of things kind of being ineffable and inexpressible in language, whereas the left side brain is very much like everything can be put into language, whereas the right side is more like things are kind of ineffable, inexpressible, can't be conformed so easily into a pattern. And so when we're talking about this also, when we're talking about this language thing, because he also wrote another book, which I haven't read, which I before we started recording, you were talking about something which also brought this to mind. This book is called The Matter with Things. I don't know if he's finished writing it or not, but he was teasing it a lot as if he was going to publish it. The Matter with Things is a book basically saying that we should stop thinking of the world as made of objects, because every object is constantly in a process, even if it's like a door, which I'm looking at right now. But even if it's a door, it's going to maybe it will break one day, or it will rot somehow one day, or someone will take it down one day. It's in the process of change, just like everything else is in the process of change. So you shouldn't think of things as sort of solid and permanent. We should have more of a worldview which is based on the fact that everything's constantly in a process, rather like people certainly are a process. Life is a process where we change over our lives. So anyway, sorry, this is a rather long comment, but what I'm saying is that what you're saying about language really brings me to that kind of angle of thinking, that what we do with language is we put a label on it and say, this language is English or something. But the reality is that's a label on top of a degree of complexity that we can't necessarily completely contain within the labels that we provide. And we're just kind of doing the best we can. But then the reality is most people, rather than thinking they're doing the best they can, they think, no, this is the reality now. English is this, and that's it.
That's it.
Rather than having this kind of awareness that the map is not the territory and that there's more in the reality than we have put in words or than we can put in words. Am I hitting something that makes sense? Because this really is what I'm feeling. And sorry, this is like a 20-minute comment, but this is what I'm feeling when we talk about this. It's like basically everyone's kind of referring to Ian McGilchrist without realizing, or Ian McGilchrist is referring to the same things as everyone else has noticed, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it's this thing of these. I'll say it like this: these things are heuristics. The idea of languages is a heuristic. It's like the idea of species. It's a heuristic. It's just a tool to allow us to make convenient reference. It's not real. You know what I mean? It's like as soon as you start thinking that these things are real, you reify them and you ontologize them and say this is part of the reality. That's when you're bluffing yourself, I think. And these kind of authors agree with that, but not only that, indigenous societies around the world have always, in a large part, I'm using my own frame of reference here. Like, for example, Joupansi society will say, as a philosophical precept, the underlying world is flux. Then the world of names is like a second world that's built on top of the world.
God, I really like that.
Yeah.
Is that in South Africa as well?
Yeah, Jutwasi culture is like from the north of Namibia, but in general, it's the language family of Jutwa or Jutwasi language is the Ju, or let's say the Ka language family, and
Oh God,
yeah,
I love that family. I love those languages. I really want to talk about. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. So, for example, a famous language is Kruntali language.
That's like one of my, because it's got the largest phoneme inventory.
Oh, that's Kron.
Oh, it's a different one.
That one is a Kuita language.
I got it.
But the Ka is a different language family, but nevertheless has a lot of, because it's the same area. It's just has so
sound a little, because I never heard anyone actually say them when he's seen them written down, and I know it has like some click in it or something. So I had to pronounce it.
Kron is written exclamation mark X O with a. I think usually put the acute accent
on that.
for the high tone, and then another O with a tilde.
Yeah.
Because it's a nasal high tone.
Yeah.
And it's a click with a velar release, so it's
yeah.
And
I actually want to talk about the language one day. I really do.
That's the name of the language.
Wow.
It's like the language. And the very famous linguist Tony Trail was the academic expert of that language. He was a very great speaker of that. His voice, you can find it in the UCLA archives, phonetics archives. There's a beautiful story that he told about Agri and Borotkhao, and about the foolishness of, I would say, a foolishness. It's like a certain moral tale of common people talking about the foolishness of mercantile capitalism. It's actually a deep story.
Wait, so is it like a modern story?
It's modern, but it's like it's about like, oh, you're foolish for wanting to go and buy at the shop, or you're foolish for wanting to go and sell something to someone. You must live in the way that we've been living, because that's the way that is connected to the environment and is connected to a history of practice that is sustainable. And this way of living, where you're trying to sell things and buy things at this person's shop and that person's, that way is not sustainable. That's what they were explaining. You can check it. It's a very nice thing. It's like a 2-minute story, and you can find it on the UCLA archives. It was recorded in the 70s as an example of Kron language that Tony Trail gave. But I like using that story because it's like a cautionary tale, of the perils of being inculcated into an accumulation economy and a mercantile economy. How, nowadays we can't avoid it, but at that time there was still a debate among people who were like resisting it, whether you should assent to being under these terms of the accumulation system, or if you should continue to live in a non-accumulation lifestyle, which is a forager lifestyle, essentially. Which I believe, I think that's a very strong impulse in all of us today. We all have a real big push and pull between a forager life and an accumulation life. Is it about using and not keeping anything? Is it about, are stories important or are things important? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, which things do you store? Do you store knowledge? And how do you store knowledge? Or do you store like material wealth and these kind of things? Everyone has a tension between that in their lives, from every demographic of every part of every society.
I'm very aware that, for those on video, you're saying this with literally like a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf of objects that I have bought.
Yeah. Me, I've got objects too. It's like, but it is a thing. Like, look, I always tell this story. I like to tell people the story. I once was in Madagascar, and I was in a small island called Nosinatu, Île aux Nattes. And I met this guy on the beach. His name was Chanu. Janu was selling lemurs. He sold a lemur called Janu that was always around us.
A lemur?
Yeah.
Like the owl?
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, is that for meat?
No, he was selling it as pets.
As pets? Okay, right.
Look, maybe I shouldn't expose him, but I guess there's a lot of people called Janu, and I don't know his surname. Anyway, Janu apparently, and I might have the story slightly wrong, but nevertheless, it's a good story, even if it's not 100% true. He used to work for a person who owned a hotel. That person died, and that hotel, that person didn't have any family. He left him the whole hotel. He sold that hotel for like a huge amount, like $1 million or $2 million or something like that. Then he rounded up his whole family from all over Madagascar. He took them to the capital, Antananarivo, and he put them in like the Hilton Hotel top 2 floors for like 3 months. I just stocked it with champagne and caviar and everything like that. And we finished the money. Gone. And then we found him on the pool, like, son, why don't you just save some of it? He's like, oh, I'm happy. What are you talking about? I've lived like any other person, any richest people in the world. I know everything in this world. There's nothing that someone can say they've lived a different, like a life that I couldn't access. I've accessed everything in this world. I'm good. So he was like satisfied with that. It's like a real non-accumulation mentality, you know?
On the surface, that I wouldn't have thought that that's a non-accumulation, but I suppose non-accumulation because that's not
you're not holding it
concept that I really thought. Because I guess he consumed all the money really, really fast. Like consumed all the things that the money could buy really, really fast.
Look, there's a paper about this. Barnard, he wrote about the difference between it's in a Southern African context, so-called hunter-gatherer, which I have a problem with that term, hunter-gatherer. Why do you have this weird double-barreled term, hunter-gatherer? It's a weird term. The difference between an accumulation ethics and a non-accumulation ethics. In an accumulation ethics, if you want to be a good person and provide for your family, you must accumulate so that you have. You must leave an inheritance for your family, for your children. You must do. That's the good thing to do. There's like a moralizing about it. In a non-accumulation ethics, if you hold money, you're selfish. If you hold resources, you're selfish. You must share them immediately. They must all be shared immediately, and they must be used immediately. Because it's antisocial to keep things. In an accumulation economy, it's antisocial to use things, but it's social to because you're building your family and structure. But in a non-accumulation economy, the ethic is opposite. It's very antisocial to hold things and keep them back. If you've got some, we must share it now. And we must eat it now. The thing that you hold is the stories, the legacy, the knowledge. That's the thing that floats on the wind, as Tabo says. The stories float on the wind, and they come from one place to another. And so that tension between is it good or is it bad to hold or not to hold, I think that's a tension that most of us have in our lives. And
not everyone would be able to use that framing. To like that, there's a framing. I think the first time I heard it is from you actually. Is a framing of that the holding is the important angle rather than the. I mean, some people might say like it's not so important to be wealthy or something, but that's not really what you're talking about here. What you're talking about here is like if you are wealthy, spend it all or give it away all quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is like it's not. I wouldn't say that one or the other is good or bad, but we do moralize according to them, and then it becomes like very divisive. Like it becomes like. How many inheritance murders do we have in the world and how many struggles of inheritance and what is it's all about who gets what, even the top down like government, the state and who gets what, who's getting, it's like, it's all about like, what is the status quo in an accumulation economy? And in a non-accumulation economy is so minoritized and so marginalized that we sort of, it's like a part of ourselves that we don't allow to even think about. And we actually look at it like quite violent terms. But it's like maybe we should try to find a balance and not moralize either way.
Well, I think that, I mean, not that this is the full story, but I think there's an element of relationships and loyalty there where like in a non-accumulation situation, if you have relationships you can rely on, you're safe. Like as in, that's a certain kind of safety. Whereas in a, like,
right,
where we are right now, we're in London right? This is a place where there's going to be very few people who have a situation where they have the kinds of relationships that they feel will be able to hold them, even if they have a non-accumulation way living. Like they would have to change the social dynamics as a whole
Exactly.
in order to allow that, because the sort of nature and value of the relationships have to change.
Exactly. And that's it. That's why it's revolutionary to do that. You know, there was a very famous Haik elder by the name of Acharub. Haik is a certain former forager group of people. Usually people use the word San, but I don't even agree with the word San. But anyway, that communities were in the north, the very north of Namibia, and in Botswana. And at the time, Botswana, they were sort of like having a crackdown where they were even sending helicopters to shoot people because they're saying they're in the game reserve, there's stock theft and all these kind of things. And this guy was continuing to hunt with his dogs. He was continuing his traditional lifestyle until he died. And I remember seeing an exhibition where it mentioned his story. I was quite moved by that Acharub was maintaining an ethic that has an ancestral heritage, which was necessarily but not intentionally in conflict with the entire system that was prevailing. And I think that's the thing. In a context of a supremely dominant accumulation ethics, it becomes an activism to think otherwise, just to think otherwise. You know, suddenly you are now you're deviant. You know, you're really deviant from the norms. And I think there is a real sense that we haven't rediscovered, first of all, the knowledge to be able to live off the land directly, in the land directly. And we also haven't established the jurisdiction to do so. And I think a healthy society is one where those things are established and those things are possible. If you need to, if everything else, any other things you want to do in life are not happening, you need to be able to go outside and go in and live for yourself with the land on the land. And if you can't do that, something's wrong in your society, in my opinion. Yeah.
So going back to the thing about, you know, kind of reifying languages and the problems of doing that. So what do you think would be a good approach to the languages of South Africa?
So I think this is the thing, okay, so there's I also wanted to mention, there's one thing I wanted to bring up as a reference before I forget. I wanted to mention a certain paper, but I've forgotten what it was. I'll come back to it. But now I want to mention the work of Ndlovu and Kamusela. So Finex Ndlovu is a scholar originally from Zimbabwe, and then is working in Australia at, I think, Monash University. And there was a very important paper for the circles of thinking that I'm moving in, which was about the lesser identified problem of intellectual tribalism, of methodological tribalism in linguistics, for example. And essentially what it's saying is that there's this concept that they give the term, a German term, Einzelsprach. And it's like a unitary language. And that creating a unitary language, to say this is a language and draw a thing around it, is essentially a colonial control mechanism. It's the same thing as saying this is this land that these people belong in, and they must go there. And if they want to come out, they need to get a passport. And this is this land. It's an ethno-nationalist idea. And this thing is a construct that is actually a colonial means of control. And so this is baked into the concept of languages. And it's the concept of language is taken as sort of like neutral, but really there's always violence in it. It's like Nguri Wathiongo says, he gave an interview, he says, languages and cultures are centers of hierarchy. Languages think they're higher, you know? And then the interviewer is arguing with him, is trying to promote English and whatever. And Nguri's like, English is not an African language. Because he's making an activism there to say that, you know, there is a hierarchy when it comes. By the way, in South Africa, all our indigenous languages, which are official, there's a hierarchy between them. And the hierarchy is based on budget. It's about how much money is the game, how much literature, how much exposure, and what is the capacity of a person, you know, in general social status, if they're to associate with one that as opposed to another.
This reminds me of an anecdote from Iris, I think. She's French. So it's actually a mutual acquaintance. So she is a French woman in South Africa, and I remember her telling me about a situation where she was speaking because she's learning some languages there, and she spoke to someone in Zulu, and they felt very offended because. What I got from her anecdote was basically this, which I wouldn't know as an outsider, but that Zulu is kind of almost treated as the most important among those languages after English and Afrikaans.
Sure.
So, and this means that a lot of people kind of refuse or are kind of unhappy about people speaking isiZulu to them because...
contextually, yeah.
Because they're like, why aren't you speaking my language? Or like, you just think everyone's supposed to speak Zulu, isiZulu, don't you?
Yeah, because words are actions. When we make the gesture of choosing our idiom, even now we're choosing this particular way of speaking. We're doing.
We have to use English because that's the only. Yeah, my isiZulu isn't.
Yeah, but
don't speak much.
But in future, maybe we always say that
would be cool. I would enjoy learning that one day. No, I almost did. That I actually is funny. With my friend Guy, we were going to learn. We were just like, young and dumb and full of excitement for languages, right? And we were like, where are we going to go and learn a language? We just want to learn something. And isiZulu was like on the menu. It was like, are we going to go to South Africa and try learning that language?
Nice.
In the end, in the name of actually like personal safety, we thought like maybe we'll try Georgia instead. Because we heard that like, as outsiders in South Africa, like it would be tricky for us to kind of understand how to get on.
But not in Georgia? I mean, Georgia, you'd also be outsiders.
No, but like I've heard that like it can. There are a lot of things that you could do in London, for example, where if you do them in certain places in South Africa, it's actually a very dangerous thing to do. And so like I'm just not prepared. I'm just not culturally prepared.
You mean like in terms of like physical danger?
In terms of physical danger,
you might get robbed. You might
getting robbed and stuff. Yeah. So like I kind of not knowing that and not having like anyone to help us, I was like, let's not go do that because we it'd just be safer to do something else.
Look, I don't know. My father was always where I stay in Johannesburg. You always are conscious of your belongings at all times. You always must feel your phone or whatever, and you don't necessarily take out your phone in certain places or whatever, because you will get your phone stolen. Everyone gets their phone stolen.
But it's not the main point. I'm not trying to make a main point about that. I'm trying to make the main point that like I was interested in learning a language like isiZulu, and I came close to choosing it. Is what I.
But I wanted to say something that my father was so good about always keeping his phone on him. Never lost his phone at home. Notorious for me. Then we went. I happened to go on a tour with my father. We were doing a play together, and then we ended up going to Paris. That's where he got his phone stolen, in Paris.
Oh, really? Okay.
Hey, Paris is dodgy. You'll always get your things stolen. But by the same token, I love the dodginess of Paris. I love the roughness of Paris.
Yeah.
And I love the roughness of where I'm from and whatever. I mean, I think a lot of places where there is a rough and ready spirit is a place where there's also a lot of possibility and creativity that you don't find in places where the rules are working very well and nobody questions them. Where there is like criminal elements and criminal deviance, I think there is also creative deviance that is possible in those contexts. So I think that's isiShalambombo is about that, because isiShalambombo is always about things that are considered criminal or deviant, but that are just that because of the system that has categorized that. Essentially, if you are refusing labor in a city in the late 1800s, and you are in the city and you don't have your papers, you don't have your job description, and you don't work on the mine or in the kitchen, as a rural person from indigenous chieftaincies in South Africa, and you've come now to the city, and you're living in the city and you're refusing to be a laborer, you're refusing work and labor, then you are, according to the system, a criminal and a loafer. But you are doing something else. So isiShalambombo is about this tsotzigheid of being a tsotsi, of being an outlaw, that you're an outlaw to the terms of propriety, not necessarily a criminal, but you're an outlaw to the system. And that is a position of agency.
So isiShalambombo, is that like, where do you see that in the don't even know how to ask this question. Like, you got a bunch of languages in South
Yeah.
Africa. Like, kind of where does I understand? You know, you've explained kind of socially where it fits.
Yeah.
But is it sort of reminiscent of? I don't know. Is it reminiscent of like? Is it taking vocabulary from isiZulu? Is it take like?
Okay, so this is the
how's it
thing.
sort of constructed?
I think that's like you're starting at the end and trying to go back, because now you're taking to say that there's isiZulu and it exists a particular lexicon of isiZulu.
Yeah.
There's an assumption. You understand? It's like
Yeah.
we would rather say that isiShalambombo is the thing that is underneath, and isiZulu is the thing that is placed on top.
I see. Okay.
And that thing is now creating a structure and an order with something that is intentionally not like that, you know? And so I think isiShalambombo, because it is effugiolexis, it's what we would say as cryptolectal, and it's secret language, you know? And because it's meant to throw you off if you don't know it, it's pulling from anything. All language is resource. Everything. You take a Portuguese word here, you take this Arabic word, you take this, so everything is fair game. Anything that you can use that's going to work. And of course, in a general context, there's a general lexicon that most people in a particular area are familiar with, a particular grammatical forms that are familiar with, that we might then draw a line around and say, this is a language area, this is people speak this language in this area. So in Lamontville, okay, you say people are Zulu speaking. But then isiShalambombo is not Zulu. So people say, oh, it's taking vocabulary from Zulu. This thing is underneath this. It's a shadow of these things. You've created these.
But there's no standardization, obviously.
You can't have a standardization of.
Obviously.
It's like saying traveler's language. Now we must standardize and make a dictionary of traveler's language in Ireland, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like we must make a dictionary. As soon as something goes into the dictionary, like let's take Verlan in French, for example.
Yeah.
So everyone knows the word ouf now. Ouf is in the dictionary of French. But ouf is just Verlan or fou.
Yeah.
Now you can't say ouf anymore. You sound like, you know what I mean? It's not Verlan anymore. It's just normal French.
Yeah.
And
so just for people who don't know Verlan, this is meaning l'envers, like the reverse. So this is like a form of French slang where you switch position of the sounds of a word backwards and say it, and then it makes it harder to understand. So it's a kind of...
And it's a very common practice in isiShalambombo. That's actually the topic. The
people do something like that as well.
Well, literally, I'm talking about is dando in Lamontville, this particular kasi or location. In like location is a shortening of native location. It was a juridical zoning of a particular township, native township, that was where all the labor force, the black labor force was put. People were removed from other parts and put there. And so in that location, one of the older locations, or kasis, because it comes from the word in Afrikaans, lukasi. So kasi, that kasi has this thing called isdando. And isdando, the way it works is through inversions. So isdando literally means isindota. Ndota means man. So it's dando. So it's ndota in reverse. But isdando, the way it works is it goes extra steps. So you would reverse something, then you would put things in the middle, you transform it a lot. Like you'd say, uyamnabowana lomtuana. Uyamnabowana. Uyambona. So uyambona means do you see him or her? We don't have gender prefixes. Uyambona. And then you reverse it. Uyamnabo. Then you will add a dummy suffix. Uyamnabowana. So now you're concealing it even further. Lomtuana. A sign ronja. So instead of saying on the side, you start adding some sign ronja. So sign ronja comes from side trouser. Now, but you just will use that as a word for side.
Okay.
Sign ronja, ga londi. On Londi's side, Londi is a common name. Londi left. So you see this guy on the side of left. Ustepeyela. Uspete. Now you reverse uspete, ustepe, and you add yela as a dummy suffix. Uspete, he's holding, like he's got a weapon.
Oh, really?
You see this guy on the left side, he's got a weapon. But he say, and you say that smiling like you're talking to someone, you're throwing people off. I'm two on the side, and you're not looking at the person. You're looking, who's Chapela? You know?
Yeah.
Because in that context, like say in the context of political activism, although these things could have all sorts of uses, you know that among you here, this is maybe during apartheid, and at any moment, police can come and take you and kill you, right? That happened all the time. You know that someone here is an informant, and you don't know who it is. So you're careful, and you're saying that this person has a weapon, just to make sure, like that we all know. But now you can't talk Zulu, standard is Zulu, because everyone understands that. You can't talk Sesotho because everyone understands that. You can't talk Afrikaans, everyone understands that. You can't talk English, everyone understands that. So you have to talk this other thing. And you talk it in a way that makes people like, it sounds like normal language, but it's not. Like, and people are like, they think they just misheard or something like that.
So it needs to, I mean, you said that some grandmothers know this language, but it does sound like there is a certain level of social constriction in terms of like, because otherwise it wouldn't be hidden. Like there needs to be, or is it just like a kind of in-joke between you and your friends?
It also, like, for example, this Dando, it has a very strong identity quotient for that particular location. It's a small township. It's one of the older townships in Durban. And it is like, people who from that township who really, really know that township, but not recent, inhabitants of that township. People who are there and who brought up there and grown up there and know the things there, who have the knowledge of that place. They use that as their symbol of that, and also their in language that is completely opaque to anyone else. And also, people who go to jail and then they talk that. The hierarchies in jail in South Africa, we have a very famous jail cult. Really, it's a cult, or it's a religious thing actually, called the number. They're called number. They say them gangs in the literature. They're not gangs. They're secret societies, and they associate with numbers: 27s, 28s, 26s, and they have their code language, which is called the Sabela. And the Sabela is very much using metaphors. And it's super opaque. You would only know it if you've been taught it. But these guys come into the jail and they're talking, this is Dando that only this location knows. And the Sabela guys are now at the back foot. Because usually the Sabela, the number guys are always know more than everyone. In fact, they say if you're not in the number, you're missing one eye. You've got only one eye. You don't see everything. So now these guys, that's what I found in my research as well. These guys who know this specific isiShalambombo of this specific location, they are able to come in the jail and disrupt that order, in fact. They're able to do that because there's something that is impenetrable that the number guy didn't know. And so it's highly localized. And so it's powerful.
That is a form of power.
It's powerful. So even an old granny who wants to, who's streetwise, someone in their 80s, she has that in her arsenal, and it's part of that thing. My informant, he took me to his parents' house, and it was his mother. She was 80-something years. And we were talking that thing together. Because I caught on, he was so happy because I caught on very quickly because I've been studying these things. And I see I'm checking for the patterns. And I get it quickly, whereas people don't usually necessarily get it. I think it's all with all research. It becomes like, if you do it in a very focused way, when you need to see it, it's like a superpower. You see it quickly, because you've already tuned yourself to it.
Yeah, dedicated years of study to it. So this thing that we're talking about, it feels like, we're talking about what is or isn't a language, and kind of like the fact that it doesn't always make sense to define, like by doing that definition, you're kind of doing a disservice to the situation as a whole.
Oh, it disservice to the reality,
Or disservice to the reality, So like, this feels like kind of a more, I don't know, almost like a more extreme version of a conversation I have had before on this podcast, which is, not with these sorts of social parameters. Like, social parameters are a bit different, but so, for example, I've spoken before on this podcast with Okan Dale, who is a Laz speaker, right, and a Laz teacher, and Laz from sort of northeast Turkey and southwest Georgia.
Sure.
And we were talking about dialects and the idea of like standardization, because like in the case of Laz, it's an endangered language. Well, yeah, it is an endangered language, and we're talking about, okay, in different parts of Europe, and in the last case in particular, there's like kind of like pros and cons, let's say, to standardization, right?
Sure,
there's certain
exactly.
contexts where, so for example, in the Basque experience, Basque people came up with essentially almost like a previously non-existent variety of Basque, which is standard Basque.
Yeah.
in the name of kind of unifying around something so that they could do their like language kind of promotion efforts and stuff like that. In the case of Romansh, something similar happened, but it wasn't a success. Like the Romansh people don't accept this kind of standard Romansh, and they remain in this kind of with these sort of multiple dialects and a great variety of Romansh and so on. So it seems like, you know, I guess what I'm coming at to this with, because like another angle on this is that the fact that in the South African context, I understand that a lot of what we're talking about, well, even the idea of an endangered language doesn't even apply if you can't say what the language is in the first place, right? Because like, what does it mean for a language to be endangered if you're like, what do you even mean by the language? Like, what are you even pointing to as a thing that's constantly in flux? Yeah. So especially if you have like this real wide sort of, I don't know how exactly to call it, but this kind of like wide linguistic variety in South African languages. And so, yeah, I mean, in the case of an endangered language, you could imagine people trying to do something like standardization in the name of trying to like support the language with one variety that gets focused on, or like you could imagine if somebody wants to make materials for more people to learn to speak, let's say isiZulu. That necessarily requires them to sort of put a box around like, this is isiZulu and we're going to make a course for isiZulu. But if they kind of refuse to do that on philosophical grounds, it means the course doesn't get made. But then as soon as they make the course, they're kind of creating this situation where they now put a box around isiZulu for everyone.
Yeah. but I think as soon as you call it isiZulu, you in a way, if you don't think of that as if you're saying a label, if you think of it, if you actually really take the idiomatic meaning of isiZulu and just say it's the Zulu way of doing stuff, you know, then you are avoiding that kind of problem because you are necessarily talking about a practice and not an object.
Right.
And a practice has like
karate or something.
Exactly.
Somebody can't say, you can't do that. That's not standard karate. Like,
yeah, you can say, oh, this is not Kyokushinkai style karate.
Yeah.
But you can't now say this is not karate.
Yeah.
You know, you can't say that.
Yeah.
Because also karate...
Like, that's not rap music.
Yeah.
Like,
although I would always make a distinction. This is not hip hop because there is a certain thing that is hip hop, right?
Okay.
But hip hop is in itself is not a genre of music. It's a certain practice. It's a certain way of approaching music making. You know, you are using old records from a particular period to put together a collage of sounds that has a particular tradition in it. And I think that's the same with all forms of culture, including language. And that when we abstract language and make it about like, it's like this thing that's in a book and you forget that you always want to avoid the dead people. There's a lot of dead people and those dead people are still talking to us. And
sorry, I missed. Where did this come from? The dead people?
So that's what I'm saying is like you can say, okay, we are promoting this endangered language.
Yeah.
Because Ngu language is now only spoken by one person. It's Guiki Katrina Oma Katrina Isao, and she be the only person who speaks Ngu as a first language from childhood, and she's teaching it now to other people. Now she's very old now, in her late 80s or 90s, I can't even remember. But then you're forgetting that Oma Katrina also has parents and grandparents, and she has all these things. And from our perspective, culturally, we don't consider those people to not be present. Those people are present.
Oh, you mean from like a sort of like a South African perspective?
Yeah. Those people are present, and the speaking of the words that they spoke is the evidence of their presence. So now, if we don't use the all this vocabulary and grammar that we associate with this language called Muki, we essentially, or if we distance it and say, this is just an abstract language that's written like this, it's like this, is like this, make the linguistic description, and then we're forgetting that this thing was in the bodies of people. And when you make your body in that way by saying, which means to talk, right? I am putting my literal physical form into the shape of something that our ancestors were also making. So I am a lion then of those things. I am a lion of this. I am the embodiment of that thing. In very real terms, I am the embodiment of that thing. So to abstract it and make it into like just some sort of abstract grammar and dictionary and these kind of things, it's very easy not to actually identify with the literal physical history of it. And I think that's always the thing. It's like the endangered language is not important to preserve in the abstract. It's important to preserve because it is our link to the riches of the past, the cultural and intellectual riches of the past, and it is our link to our connection, our umbilical cord to where we come from. And not in identity terms, where we come from in literal physical terms. Like, it's like we would want to be able to feel that person in us through speaking like that. So we don't have it's easy to dodge the practicable identification with the cultural world and intellectual world of a language by just saying it's an endangered language and you leave it there. So then you stand outside and say, we're going to promote this language, but really like you're going to speak that language. So you're going to be that person. You're going to be it. You have to, this is kind of a deeper philosophical question, but I do think there is a sense of like, I always say like this, for example, take isiZulu words. I would say sometimes people are talking English in isiZulu.
In a Zulu kind of way.
Yeah. So in other words, you take a concept and a way of thinking that's very English. You've got a way of thinking that is very much Western, and now you're expressing it with Zulu words. It's not Zulu what you're doing. That's English. You're talking English in Zulu.
Oh.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, that sets a very high bar, in a way, for like trying to actually speak isiZulu, right?
Yeah, because like, for example, I'll use this good example, which is quite loaded, but like I think I'll go for it, right? There's a phrase, these words, which could come from a Zulu idiom. Umuntu omnyama. The literal meaning, a black person.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. So nowadays, when someone says that, they mean a racial distinction. They're talking about race.
Yeah.
But in former times, and essentially according to the idiomatic meaning of that, umuntu omnyama means a wicked person.
Oh, right.
It means
like black magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means a person who is practicing a dark intention.
Right.
A person who's trying to, do something that is quite nefarious, maybe. What we would call umtarati, someone who is a wizard, who is trying to produce some sort of concoction that's going to force people to do certain things. And the other one that I always like to mention is the word umlungu in isiZulu or isiXhosa or so many things, which people associate with, okay, this means a white person in the racial sense. But umlungu comes from the word umlumbi, and umlumbi means, it's from the verb uglumba. This is my assessment of this etymology. Uglumba means to like concoct something. For a particular purpose, and negatively, taken negatively, it means to make a spell on someone, to create, to be a mtarati, to be a black wizard. So the white then constructed in this thing is the dark wizard who's using maybe the legal system, for example, as a magic by which to control people. And not magic magic as in a craft that has a function for control. So the deeper meaning of these terms that we take in a Western way, and we just think, oh, everyone knows race, this race, that race. If you look carefully into it, you start to then deconstruct racial categories, and you start to understand a more deeper kind of way that these histories of violence have penetrated, So I think that's the thing. For me, there's a reclamation of those, hidden histories of these words that speaks more to what is to inhabit the grammar and to inhabit the vocabulary.
So you mean when you reclaim these words, hang on a second. So, are you saying that using this? I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it in the way you said it. Like, but are you saying to use that term like black person with the meaning of racializing them as a person with dark skin?
You're talking English.
That's English rather than that's not really isiZulu.
That's not this.
Even though the sound is like.
It's using
phonetics and
you're using Zulu words to say something that's English.
Right, I see. But then, like, what happens when suppose that you end up with some language change in isiZulu where some such concept, which is sort of not true to former, like the way that people used to speak, ends up being enshrined in the way that people speak. Like, how do you approach it if it becomes a common way of speaking?
But I mean, the thing is, which people? Who? Do you understand?
But, I mean, I don't know. Like it becomes sort of normal, and this is because language change. People
but
often
normal
borrow
in what context? Normal for who?
In all contexts for everyone. Like if you know you get these kind of portmanteau things and stuff into other language. Like I'm not saying this. I don't know, just to be provocative. I just mean like this is the way that languages can do things. Like they often have contact with other languages, and then they'll bring on. Terms and ways of speaking from other so that essentially they become what you might call less isiZulu. But the thing is, if it ends up, you might borrow an entire phrase that is just directly phonetically, with some alterations, directly phonetically English or something, phrases into which would be normal, like it's just a loan word, right?
Yeah.
But then does that, is that diluting it, or like, do you feel like it's claiming it, or like, how do you conceptualize when that kind of thing happens in language change?
It depends on what is the hierarchy of the interaction. If you're taking something from outside into something and you're using it, you're using the logic of an internal system, then you're just using external things as a resource. And in fact, that's a common practice going back in our part of the world. You say, "Indugu enhle igawule ezizweni," meaning a beautiful stick is cut in faraway countries. It's often talked about marriage, like you must go and find a spouse in a faraway country because that's the way you get the good one. Yeah. Do you understand?
Okay, yeah.
So there is the sense that you need to go outside and bring something outside, but it's about what is the status quo to that. Are you bringing a whole system and just replacing a system? Are you taking this whole way of thinking and you're just replacing an endogenous way of thinking with an exogenous way of thinking? Or are you taking elements of the outside and you're bringing it into your terms? Like I always use the example of like, even just a rephonologization. If we think in Japan, what is McDonald's? McDonaldo. You necessarily are making the phonology Japanese.
Yes.
So Japanese is in the position, of propriety there. And McDonald's is coming from outside, but it's going to have to obey the systems of Japanese phonology.
Right.
Yeah, you're not going to just replace the word and make it English. You understand? You're going to take that English word, whatever Scots word,
Easy Japanese,
Americanized Scots word, and you're going to East Japanese it. Yeah. East Japan. In fact, we'd say it like that. Yes, McDonald. Ngase Japan. Ba phimisa Japan. Batho ba kutona roto. Yabo? So that's the same way. That's how when I explain ispekle, I'm like, when you use ispekle, if I take a word that comes from outside, I need to sintuize it. So I need to uphimisa ngesintu. You need to pronounce it in ngesintu. So if I say Michael, then I must say uMaikeli. You see?
I like that. It sounds really nice.
Yeah. Or for you to be Ustanisla. That's how. Ustanisla.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
And this is something that I enjoy actually. Is I enjoy as I learn different languages. My name sounds slightly different in so many different languages, and I enjoy that. Like in Persian, it's Estash. Because they like Spanish,
Estash.
they can't have they can't have S consonant. They can't have S followed by a stop. Like in Spanish they will say like I don't know, like España. Even the name of Spain, right? It's not España, it's España.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and lots of other things like that where they can't have
the
at the beginning, they need to have the air before the S and something.
Yeah.
So like they do that with in fact it's quite difficult for Spanish people. They try, they're like stash. They're like it takes a lot of effort for them to say. Whereas in Iran, like they would just directly say like estash. So like that's like one example, but like so I quite enjoy how it sort of phonetically changes in different places.
And you know what's funny is that stash or stash, stash or stash, in fact, in South Africa is a common shortening for the names Tembiso.
Oh,
So
I could just borrow that name.
yeah, I was
mean,
Tash. I was Tash. or it's Tembele or whatever, a word that has that ste at the beginning. So my colleague and friend's name is Ustera. Ustera is actually Tembiso, but you've just created some extra phonology there as a thing. So it's Tash.
Yeah.
There's lots of people called in South Africa. There's so many people called Tash.
Well, great. That's my name in South Africa now. I mean, in Taiwan, like in the Taiwanese indigenous people, they ask me to choose a name because they have like a small inventory of first names. They ask me to choose a first name. So like with the Saedic people, I'm Takis.
Takis.
Yeah, and I quite like that. I'm Takis with them.
Takis. It's nice.
Anyway,
it sounds cute. Takis.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah.
So, but anyway, you just started talking about, and something we do need to talk about is big.
It's big.
Yeah. Oh, no. God,
it's an alveolar click. So an alveolar click is pronounced like this. The tip of your tongue goes to your alveolar ridge, which is the ridge just behind your teeth. It's the same position as saying a t sound, but instead of pushing air out, you're sucking air in. So you're putting your tongue on the alveolar ridge, and then you suck air in. You're sucking your tongue in. Yeah.
Almost.
In fact, when we say click sounds in Afrikaans, we call them suigklanke, which means sucking sounds.
Right.
Clicks are implosives that are about sucking the. So we have 5 clicks in Southern African region. We have the alveolar click. We have the dental click. We have that's the lateral click. You've got that's a palatal click. Then you've got that's the bilabial click. Sometimes called kiss click.
Yeah.
But in Sintu languages like Zulu and Xhosa, for example, you only have 3 forms of clicks.
Okay.
And then it's for Kwemana language, Kwadi languages, Kha languages, and Goita languages. Those 3 language families have 4 clicks, and actually Goita also has a 5th click, the click. For example, in Nuki, a cat, if you say a cat, you say Mwah.
Oh, so cute. Yeah, cats always have such good names. Like in Seoul from Taiwan, it's called a niao.
Yeah, niao.
Niao is the word for cat. I just love the sound that it makes.
So many places in Africa is exactly the same.
Or bunun, another Taiwanese language. It's naong.
Oh yeah,
naong is the word for cat. It just sounds like a meowing.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about isibe. Hang on, isibe.
Yeah.
Sohlambo.
Yeah,
Sohlambo. Okay. You've been involved with this script for quite a while, and this is a script indigenous to South Africa.
Correct.
And you're wearing a T-shirt about it. So
the T-shirt, it's written from top to bottom, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, which is a very common proverb that essentially expresses the philosophy of Ubuntu or personhood. Okay. That umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, which means a person is a person through people. One is not a person by one's own lights. Okay. One is a person only through interaction. We make each other people. No one is born a person. You make each other people.
Yeah, which speaks a lot to the kind of loneliness that a lot of, there's a so-called, I think it's a real thing, but like a loneliness epidemic where people haven't got as much contact with others as they used to in the past because they spend so much time on phones and computers and stuff. And then this philosophical idea of like people are people because of others interacting with them means that you're not an actual person that exists if you're lonely like that. It's like you're not even a person at that stage.
If you can be so-called alone, but if you believe that you are alone, like for example, if you're not actually alone because you come from somewhere, and those people are in you, like even if you can say genetically, or even you can say, or literally, if you consider the plant to be a person, because at the end of the day, it's the same kind of structure, similar kind of structure as you. If you consider personhood to other things, in fact, sometimes in certain contexts where you are alone, you need to do that. And sometimes people use technologies. Now they're having ChatGPT as their spouse. You know what I mean?
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah. So you see, but if one doesn't I'm going to say it like this, even though I don't necessarily like using the word. If one doesn't decolonize the mind to think about oneself as a blip, a solo individual dot passing through a vast universe. Like if you keep on thinking about yourself like that, that is going to make you alone, because it's also just not true. It's just not a scientific reality. It's just not. It is a convention. It is a convention of naming. It's a heuristic. And that heuristic, we have to ask the question, does this heuristic actually serve us? Is this convention really giving us life? Or is sometimes it might be useful, but is in these contexts where there's loneliness epidemic and all, it seems like there's a philosophical problem here. There's a certain problem with the ontology. We've distinguished ourselves as distinct individuals, and this is it may be unhealthy way of thinking. You know?
I've read some books before about some research about kind of like psychological / anthropological research about people's I'm not sure the people who wrote the books didn't use the word ontology, but it does speak to what you're talking about. So one of these is called The Geography of Thought. And then
that's a nice title. Beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, and there's another one I can't remember the name of, but I spoke about them on another podcast I used to do called Education Bookcast, where I spoke about books around education and stuff. And it was with the idea. I mean, it's because with this wider idea that a lot of what I was reading was psychology research. Sure. And then a very important thing that came up is that in reality, the sampling that we're doing in psychology research is often limited to predominantly like North American university campuses.
Sure.
And that's like such a narrow sampling of like humanity. Also because the age is usually like 18 to 30 or something, right?
Yeah.
So it's such a narrow sampling. There's also a social aspect, right? That's majority. Most of those people have a certain level of wealth and so on, etc. So it's like more. The sampling is very particular anyway in this psychological research. But then it was framed as like this. It's a bit like how. It reminds me a bit of how Chomsky kind of feels like English is everything. Is this rather than thinking like, oh, actually, there's lots of languages in the world and they teach us a lot more by looking at them rather than just focusing.
Is that what Chomsky thinks? I don't know.
No, I'm paraphrasing, but like Chomsky only ever really tried to do the grammar of English with the idea that it will generalize, rather than thinking, oh wait, if you look at other languages, that could be quite helpful actually. So I'm slightly paraphrasing what his work was like, but with that sentence. But yeah, this. This psychology research was sort of limited to a certain kind of people. And then these researchers were doing things like, okay, what if you do the same kinds of experiments, but you do them with people from markedly different places in the world? And then some of the things I remember them finding were they did a lot of stuff comparing Japan to the United States, because there's quite a significant difference in like the ways that they think, essentially. And they were doing things like finding like, very simple things like describe this scene. And it was a scene, when I describe it, obviously, it was a pond scene, okay? So there was like a pond and it had fish in the pond, right? And then the Americans would say something like, there's a big fish and the big fish is like swimming around, and they would identify characters, usually the main character of the scene, and they would talk about the main character as a kind of hero of the story of what's happening in the pond. Whereas the Japanese people would spend a lot more time talking about the pond, like the water, the grass, the surroundings, the background, and more time talking about like all of the fish, not just the big one. So they would have this kind of wider sense of like what to talk about, as opposed to the Americans were like, well, ignore all that background, just focusing on the hero,
the big fish.
So that was one of many findings in that thing, and this kind of brought me to realize that it's just coming back to what you're saying, that like actually this way of thinking about when people introduce themselves, Americans are more likely to introduce themselves as a unitary person with a set of characteristics. They're like, I'm Stash, I'm quite nerdy, I'm quite patient, I'm quite whatever. Right?
Yeah.
But then
like a Pokemon.
Yeah, like a Pokemon. I'm a fire Pokemon. But then the Japanese people would say something like, when they ask to introduce themselves, they say like, in what context? They say like, do you mean like, who am I talking to? Because like the way they would introduce themselves would vary depending on who they're talking with.
Relational, yeah.
And then when they do introduce themselves, they do a lot of things like, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a dad or whatever, like I'm a student, whatever it is. So like they would talk about themselves in terms of their relations with other people as part of their definition of who they are. So like, this is some of the stuff that it just speaks to kind of what you're saying, I guess, is I actually think that it's it's not just like what you might think, that half the world is kind of like atomizing everything and half the world is thinking about things in terms of relations. It's actually more like it's specifically like Western European modern countries and the US and kind of influences of that culture, which is specifically an extreme point of atomization in the philosophy. And the rest of the world is like just not as atomizing. I mean, even myself in my own thinking about like what the nature of reality is, honestly, it's getting kind of deep, but it really, I went through a process where I eventually, and now I'm reached the point where I'm like, actually, relationships are everything. Like, even physics, right? I used to think of physics as like atoms, like the world is made of atoms. And now I think like atoms are meaningless unless you talk about like the relationship between the nucleus and the electrons. Like that's what makes an atom the atom in the first place, right? So if you don't have that relationship, who cares about the atoms, right? What matters is the forces that happen between the atoms, right? So even at that physical level, you think it's physics because you're talking about atoms, but the reality is that's your mindset, or like that's like your certain kind of culture breaking through to make you think about things in terms of atoms instead of make you think about things in terms of relations.
Sure. I love it. I will use that example about like the relationality of atomic structure. it's key, yeah. Because I mean, we can even like really put it in like. So in my PhD research, the theoretical framework that I'm using is a Tram cosmogenic framework. So Tram is an endogenous cultural idiom in Southern Africa. The language called Tram language is supposedly not spoken anymore. It just means that no one has showed themselves to the general public as being a speaker of Tram language. Some words exist in Afrikaans variety spoken by people who have the heritage of Tram communities, but Tram is represented in the archive through about at more than 10,000 pages of writing. Verbatim transcriptions of discourses given by Tram and Kong and other language-speaking people in the 1870s around then. And so I look into that archive and the more general connections to the folklore and cosmologies around the philosophical side of these Tram insights. And I look at those things in terms of how does one apply this in a scientific context? How does one apply this in a context of linguistics? How does one apply this to my specific data that I've got? And for example, we can apply it here by saying, if you think of the nucleus as a person, and you think of if you think of the electron as a person, there's a relationship there. You know what I mean? It's like every agent in a Tram mode of thinking is a person. A person is a particular empathetized agent. In other words, you understand it as an object looking back at you, the other looking back at you. You are also looked at. And so if you start to understand things in those terms, I mean, it connects to certain other modern like theories like actor network theory, Latour, these kind of things where if you hold the pen, you act on the pen acts on you. It's an agent. Everything is an agent, But if we think of that in terms of this is a person, our attitude to that thing kind of changes quite substantially. If you think of,
It's funny you say that because I think this is almost the opposite of a lot of people who have a very, I don't know how to put it exactly, but let's call it an atomizing perspective. Will actually do the opposite. They will actually deny the personhood of people themselves. Right? They'll be like, a person is like a pile of atoms. They'll cut down a person like philosophically into small pieces and say like, well, there's no person anymore because I've analyzed it now.
It's like trying to remove the person now.
Yeah.
I guess it's trying to. It is a great and perhaps sometimes a noble pursuit of objectivity. We want to be good researchers and be objective and to not have bias so that you don't have to use your worldview as it's very difficult to not impose your worldview onto the things. But in the search for objectivity, you forget that you have an audience, you have someone you're speaking to. So you have your own perspective, your own necessary context and positionality. And that thing can never go away. It's always going to be in what you're saying. You're never going to be able to dodge it and be some sort of like a neutral party. You're always going to have a certain worldview that you are going to impose on whatever data set you have. But just the act of like trying to talk about something with someone, it's always the omission of the fact that you need a person to talk to about it. Who is your audience? Who is the you? That's why I always like to quote that passage from Fanon, where he says, "Il faut édifier le monde du toi." One needs to edify the world of the you, the informal you, the one that looks back, the you, the personhood of the other. That is what gives this whole context any meaning anyway. We wouldn't be able to have an objective conversation if they were not having a conversation by which we can objectify together. We cannot, it's always there's the first person, which is the subjective. Then there's the third person, which is the objective. But you always forget there's a second person required to have either. I don't exist on my own. I only exist because looking at myself from outside, from your perspective. That's the only way I can even imagine that I am a person. And at the same time, the only way we can imagine that there's a microphone and a computer and a discourse is if we're having the conversation. Otherwise, it's not real. It doesn't exist. So the requirement is the you, the great you. And I think that's why I love that passage of Fanon. And I also I read Fanon in English in South Africa because it's very common to read Fanon. Like if you are in a certain intellectual class of South African thought, where you're trying to grapple with, social issues and the philosophies around the social structure of our context, you will encounter Fanon, but you'll encounter Fanon in English. The moment that I start to try to read Fanon in French, that's when I start to see, I see the deeper poesy here. It's like, remember in Helen's talk,
Helen McGowan, she'll be on the podcast at some point as well.
Helen McGowan was talking about in Japanese, I think it was in 19th century Japanese texts, the proliferation of allographs, that there were many more allographs for certain kana. And those,
so an allograph being more than one potential way of writing the same sound. Yeah.
And those different allographs created a very much more nuanced meaning-making structure in those texts, where that was much deeper than just what is the linguistic meaning of that thing.
Just teasing that episode now.
Yeah. So the visuality of that and the history of those allographs and where they're positioned, once you start to encounter those kind of things, that was like for me reading Fanon in original way it was written, is now I'm seeing where these things are placed in a richer way. Because you still get the idea when you translate it to English. You're quite a good enough translator, you get the idea. But only when you check the origin, now you're going to see, what was the person? And also then you also have to know more. Like I'm necessarily needed to now understand more French to understand that,
Yeah.
So it's like, it's that thing of the island, when it's about knowledge being like this island where, a person with a very small island, can know a lot, But the moment you have a very large island, you are aware of how much you don't know. And how much you don't know is more than how much you know. So the more you know, the more you don't know. And that's the...
Well, you learn a lot about all the things that you could know, but you don't have enough time to get to them. And, and then your awareness of what you don't know increases.
So... Yeah, I think that's also like a sort of an attitude, an artistic and scholarly attitude, is to say like one must be confidently unsure. You must go very confidently into the fact that you don't know. And you must be excited to try to know. And knowing that when you try to know, you're going to not know more. And then also you must also keep it. This is I did a project with the artist Katrin Böhm, who is a Londoner here, and myself and Chantel Lou, who was a collaborator for many years through the peer learning network called School of Commons, which was based in Zurich at ZATK, but it's not there anymore. We made this peer learning project together, which we called Ubunqenye, which means parthood. Ubunqenye, parthood. So
Parthood?
Parthood. parthood, partness.
Partness. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
parthood.
Yeah, parthood.
Parthood. Ubunqenye. So inqenye means a part. Ubunqenye means partness.
Okay.
Ubu is like an abstractive, essentially it's a concentrative prefix. It creates a connotation of concentration or distillation.
Right,
so
right.
it's used for like expressing an abstract concept
Right.
often, right? So we worked with Catherine and we and she had this one project where it was called "Keep It Complex, Make It Clear," and I really liked that. It's like
yeah. Don't lose the details. Yeah.
don't lose. Yeah, don't simplify in order to make it clear. Don't make it obscure because it's or unclear because it's complex. Keep it complex. Still make it clear. You need to have you need to preserve the complexity in your explanation because if you don't do that, you're lying. You know.
I wrestle with this in our, in my work, in pedagogical work around languages, where things need to go step by step, and I try and break them down as tiny steps as possible to make it manageable. But I don't want to be misleading. So it's like I wouldn't exactly say it's a balance. It's more like I'm trying to make sure that the learner sometimes, they need to sort of absorb one thing before they're ready for the next layer of complexity. And a lot of it is about timing. It's about like making sure that they don't overgeneralize what they've currently learned, but also giving them enough breathing space to kind of internalize the first layer before I get to the second layer. So there's a lot of like, I would think of it as timing, as rhythm in a sense in the curriculum of like, we're going to do this, now we're going to breathe, or we're going to go somewhere else, and I'm going to come back to it to give you another layer, because you need another layer. But if I gave you both layers at once, you'd just be kind of confused. Right? So it wouldn't be clear, basically, because like it would be too much at once. But I can't leave you with only one layer, because you're going to have the wrong impression. So like that, it is a certain kind of tension, but I think we manage it through having the right kind of rhythm.
Absolutely. I love that you frame it in terms of pedagogical rhythm. But it's also like literal rhythm, like it's raps, when you... It's like, how do you convey the story eloquently with the rhythm that fits it? How do you pass the information or allow the information to be passed in the most effective manner? What rhythmic devices are you literally going to use in your speech? It's these like lost arts to a large degree because people are so focused on textual abstraction. Like the orality of conveying important information is something that is really, it needs a resurgence. Because we like the oral arts, we would call it ubuciko bomlomo, the ingenuity or the techne of the mouth. How to convey important information in a way that, or not even necessarily important information, but interesting information, or let's say connective information in a way that is rhythmically and expressively potent. It's something that we, so often we go to a conference and the presenter is they're just reading the text, and I end up detaching. You have to really force yourself to listen to what this person is saying, because now it's abstracted. You can't really, you want to be able to feel the what the person is trying to say, and sometimes you can see through their facade of their text to what they actually are saying, and those are the moments that we would like to like pump life into. As I never forget that phrase by Hassan Haj, who is a great scholar that I once attended a traveling conference with. And he talked about pumping life into something. He was talking about pumping life into it. And I really appreciated that phrasing. It's like, you can fill a concept or a interaction with a vivacity that through like presence and physical, effort and rhythm and these kind of things. And I think that's a skill of a teacher, even if you're devising a course manual, you're still doing a rhythm,
Well, no, I mean, if you want to make a good course, that it does take passion to do it. You can't, I mean, if you've got no feelings at all about what you're teaching, I don't know, maybe you can do a good job, but it might not be that easy.
You have to, I think you do have
people
to
can
feel it.
People can feel that you put effort in. Like, people can feel that you care about what you're doing. But yeah, on the one hand, I do want to talk about, here we go again,
You
isiBet.
can also use the other name, which is Diti Matsadinuku.
Diti Matsadinoku.
Diti Matsadinuku, yeah.
Titima, tradinoko. That sounds a bit easy to say.
Titima, yeah.
So I do want to talk about that, but also I kind of, even though it's not strictly about language, I feel like this is like a good opportunity because we're into it. It's a good opportunity to talk about like this philosophical stuff because I feel it very strongly and I never have a chance to. There's never a moment where I talk about it.
I know, but that's also like why we're trying. Like you saw myself and Alice Matsili's pair of talks at the conference. It was essentially focused on the philosophy of writing. You know, and it's like I think now is the time where we must do active and on the ground philosophy. The philosophy must be a living thing. You must use your body to do it. You know what I mean? Like it's something that you have to activate in because we have stopped questioning the paradigms. You know, we sort of like, because we're busy now, we've got to go from one thing. We've got to get someone to understand quickly because the TikTok is only 30 seconds maximum long. You have to get them to understand it quickly. So you're just reusing paradigms and it's like, oh, maybe we should actually start to question paradigms. And you can only do that through a deeper philosophical engagement, I think. So I think it's relevant, you know?
Well, I want to share something which, and I guess normally would never come up, but now since we're here, I want to talk about it, which is like my own, I kind of alluded to it quickly, but my own experience of dealing with almost like ontology, let's say, in my own life. So because I studied engineering, but kind of, it was very scientific anyway. I had like a very scientific university experience and even in school as well. So, and I feel like what happened is that I got into this kind of frame of thinking about everything analytically, and it ended up with me, because like, I think there was a certain point, maybe one of the hardest points was when we were learning cell biology at university, and it started to break down into its like components, right? Into its, and then you started to see, oh, this molecule makes up the cell wall, and this molecule does whatever, cell membrane, and so on. And like, you know, these, you know, these sort of enzymes like mechanistically do something in a way that I can understand from like a chemistry and like a physics perspective. And when things got broken down like a lot into their sort of atomized pieces, and then I started to kind of see the entire world this way. It actually, as part of understanding it, as part of understanding like the science, it became like a worldview that I didn't realize that I was sort of, that it was a view rather than like the view.
Exactly.
Right? It feels like the view, like the way you need to see it.
Yeah.
And then it actually made me kind of depressed. Like it made me kind of depressed because I started thinking things like nothing, you know, because I mean, not in any particularly deep way, but I had like a small amount of encounter with like Buddhist philosophy.
Sure.
And I started thinking like the ideas of things like emptiness, and that like you would look at a person, and I was saying before that like you can break down, if you remove like one skin cell from a person, are they still the same person? If you remove, you know, you got this kind of like pile of sand thing, like at what point does it stop being a pile of sand? And you can do this with all objects. Like you can get a chair and just keep removing things. There's no particular point at which it stops being a chair.
Yeah.
And that means that the existence of the chair is null. It's like it is not really there. And what's really there is like the atoms, I guess, right? But even they can be broken down into smaller pieces. And it kind of ended up with this thing of like, you know, nothing is, like I don't exist, nothing is real, and like also nothing is kind of, everything is mechanistic. It's got the kind of Newtonian thing of like, oh, it's just particles bouncing around. That's what creates everything. And that was really depressing. And then it was actually a long process with getting into some of this stuff about how different cultures think. And I start like, because at first when I read it and I thought, what do you mean you think about the world relationally? It doesn't make any sense. Like when I first read it, it was like completely alien and I couldn't get it. And I was like, they're just fooling themselves. It was kind of like, they just don't really know the right perspective. Was kind of like my perspective. And then it, like over a long period, I started to see that like, you know, that rather than just having charitably being like, okay, I'll let your perspective in, even though it's a bit silly, was like my initial feeling. Over time, I was like, no, wait, hang on a second. Relationships are, I mean, even when I used to teach chemistry, right? Very basic chemistry, like starting from zero, you know, with kids sometimes. And even if people were a bit higher, I felt like going back to the basics was good to make sure they didn't have any gaps. And we would be talking about the, you know, the structure of the atom. And then I would, you know, something I find in chemistry teaching is that often people don't emphasize things. Like, as in everything is said in the same tone of voice. There's no sense of like, this is hierarchically really important. These things are connected in a way where this thing's in the center and you need to really focus on this thing. It helps explain a lot of things. It's a central concept. So as part of that, I would say, okay, so there are protons, neutrons, and electrons. And I'd try and emphasize, like, nobody cares about neutrons. I'd be like, neutrons are like, they are occasionally you need to think about them, but 90% of the time you don't. And the reason is because they don't have charge. It means they don't interact with anything. And then, like, I guess I'm de-emphasizing them so I can emphasize the protons and the electrons. But the reason why they're de-emphasized is because they don't have relationships. Right? The reason you don't need to care about neutrons is because they don't form any relationships. Right? And like, it's just...
What's funny is like, guys, don't be a neutron. Don't be a neutron.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I guess we I'm sure there's relationships of the neutron that we don't understand.
Oh no, it's not they don't have any. Yeah. Like, it's just that they are like fewer and less common and less important for the specific thing we're talking about.
Their relationships are not the status quo of what relationships are important.
Well, because if you're talking about chemistry, like, you need to talk about relations between things with charge, so like positive and negative charge.
Yeah.
So neutrons are, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I was inadvertently kind of brought up with a perspective which I didn't even think was a perspective, and I thought it was just the way, like the truth. Like, if people don't use this, they don't understand science. And
sure,
to be clear, I don't think science is bad. Like, I think science is amazing. I just think that it's possible by learning science to have a worldview where you kind of think that it's the atomizing everything is the only way you can do things. Whereas I just don't think that's right. And I think
also that's not science. That's like an interpretation of science.
It's essentially a philosophy that comes in as a kind of baggage when you learn it. Which it doesn't have to come in as baggage. Description. Yeah. But it does by accident. You don't even realize.
Yeah. I mean, science is like, just you don't know the thing. You're going to make an hypothesis as to how the thing works, and you're going to test if that thing works. Everything else is baggage. I mean, it's a very basic thing that everyone has to do. If you go outside and you don't know how something works, you're going to have to do science. Yeah. It's like you're going to basically have to do it. That's why I always say, like, when in terms of my theoretical framework for my work, it's like Kabo. I'm using Kabo as a sage, as a Kwagagricha. And Kabo was this sage who spoke on a lot of topics that were all recorded by this linguist called Lucy Lloyd. But some of the things we're talking there is science, because necessarily, culturally, if you are living a forager life, you are having to do science all the time in order just to eat, because you need to be able to test out certain hypotheses, and you need to have an interpretive model that's going to predict certain results, because you're going to need to know, okay, at this point, this thing is going to arrive here, then I'm going to be able to eat that. Or at this point, this thing is going to come like this, so you must be careful, because, you know what I mean? We're all doing this kind of everyday science, all the time. But in contexts where you have a very close connection to the natural rhythms of the environment, it is a context which is hyper scientific. You know what I mean? And so, contrary to this idea that so-called indigenous peoples are not doing science, it's more scientific.
Well, it's like, this reminds me of another book that I've covered some really random sounding books on this education podcast, but I covered one about prison gangs. I know that sounds like out of context, but it was because I was trying to understand, like, kind of the dynamics of people and power and stuff, and I kind of felt it was relevant. And to me, it felt relevant, even though some people might think that's not anything to do with education. But anyway, and like, this book about prison gangs was talking about how, like, I remember a quote from it where a guy was saying how, on the surface, you might think prison gangs is very emotional, violent, people can't control themselves. But the reality is, you enter into, and obviously I'm not sure if it's obvious, but I don't have personal experience with this, right? I'm only taking it from the book.
I wouldn't have put it past you, man. you might have understood.
I'm hiding something, maybe. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, in these, he mentions in these gangs that, or in this prison context, that you actually need to become hyper rational. Like, it's, in fact, on the surface, you may think that people are overly emotional, or that people are, reacting to impulse only. But the reality is they're actually performing a very precise calculus that most people don't need to do on a day-to-day basis, because it doesn't matter. You don't have to be so specific and precise with all your reactions. In the prison context, everything is so there's so much kind of meaning and interpretation behind your movements. They could lead to your death, right? If you do the wrong move.
Exactly.
So it really is really important to rationally consider everything and do everything rationally. I mean, and then it goes into this whole thing about what is that what is the framework that they live in, and what is the logic of their social world. But that reminds me of just on the surface, you're saying, like, on the surface it may seem unscientific, but actually because of what they're contending with, it's not like that at all.
Yeah. It's like there's a certain universality to the scientific method that is, despite all this other baggage that you use to interpret like what the method means. It's like, it's like, I guess it's like so often science is mistaken, or like scientism is mistaken for science.
Yes.
Like people do the scientism where it's more like a superstitious attitude to what is the meaning of science in society. And it's not actual science, because because as a scientist, you have to not be sure. Now, when you start being sure, you're not doing science.
I think you need to like gauge you need to realize what parts are science and what parts are philosophy and separate them, or like at least be aware of them. I'm not sure separating is the right word, but at least be aware of that. And then you also need to gauge your level of certainty with the level of evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
And allow alternative interpretations, which often are like completely better explain what you previously thought was already well explained.
Exactly. So in scientism, the whole ethic of scientism is more like an authority figure telling you that this is the right way and there's no other way, So it's like it's sort of the opposite to what like the principles of science is, where you're supposed to go into it knowing that you could be wrong all the time. You could be wrong. In fact, you have to accept at all moments that you don't know, and you're only trying to see how much you can know, never knowing the full picture.
Yeah. So I want to go back to isiBete. isiBete.
You're going up on the last syllable.
isiBete.
isiBete.
isiBete. There we go.
isiBete.
isiBete.
Yeah.
It's going to take me a while to get used to it. So to speak about this, because this is actually how I first kind of got to know you, is through the context of this script. So could you tell us a bit about like where it comes from, what your involvement's been in it, like how and where it's being used?
Okay. isiBete sohlamvu or ditima tsa dinuku is a pan-Southern African writing system, meaning it's used for all Sintu language form in the Southern African region, which is, if you know the literature about this, Guthrie's Zone S. So Guthrie was a scholar who divided up language areas in the so-called Bantu languages. We don't use that word. We say Ntu languages of the larger African continent into certain geographical areas. And there's one area that's marked S, and that's in the south, the extreme southeast. And that whole area, there is a very strong interrelation between all speech forms in that area, to the degree that they are also considered to have a common root, in terms of linguistic phylogenetics, if we follow those theories of historical linguistics. And so it's a good context linguistically for essentially a universal writing system for that region. And this writing system is based on traditional symbologies, which are found in beadwork, basketry, pottery, and in mural art, to name some media that this is traditionally used in. And it is essentially a phonetic system derived from these preeminent ideographic and I would say in general more broader symbolic traditions, and it is used for writing all Sintu language in Southern Africa, regardless of the categories of language. It's because it's phonetic, and it's created through triangular forms which are called amapeka. Ipeka, essentially, the word ipeka means like a beaded message, like a traditional beaded message.
A beaded message.
Yeah.
So made from beads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was a very old tradition, going back centuries.
Yeah.
Is that you send messages through a beaded square.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
A very old tradition.
It's a bit like a kipu.
A bit like a? Yeah.
Peruvian knot-based writing system. Yeah.
Yeah, and those messages were according to geometric symbolism, and and there's certain geometric figures that were ideographic, and then color symbolism. And you would read it according to the relationality. So you wouldn't be able to, an external person wouldn't be able to read it. Only me and you would understand what it means.
Oh, wow.
Because we know our relationship. Because there's a system of meaning according to what form is there and what color is there. It was usually, sometimes it's called incwadi yothando, a love letter. Yeah. So they used to call it that.
So it's like, do you mean like, it's almost like a cryptographic key to know like what our relationship is?
Yeah, to send a message about the relationship. Like, for example, you could have like there was a system of binary color symbolism where, for example, red would be either hatred or love. Yellow would be either withering away and dying or wealth. Blue would be either a coldness or a request. So there's sort of like this opposite system. So you wouldn't know if two colors are together. You would have to know the relationship to know what is meant. And also there's a level of ambiguity. But sometimes you could actually be quite clear. But someone outside the relationship wouldn't know.
So this is another... No, it's not really. It feels a bit like an effugiolexis. We were talking about before, effugiolexis. But it's more like a coded message, because I presume that means the messenger might know your relationship. But if your message got intercepted by some random person, they wouldn't know what's being written.
They wouldn't, but also it's not about, it really is a personal message, you know. I mean, often it would be like one would be like, so you have red with blue and yellow. And now we must understand that in the relationship, because of the context of the relationship, okay, someone is telling their lover, okay, please come back because the love is dying.
Oh. Okay.
You know, that kind of thing. So you wouldn't know that because the blue can be either a request or it can be a coldness. So it could be even say, I'm feeling cold to you. The love is dying.
I see.
Or it could be, I hate you. Because you know, you know what I mean. The context would have to tell you.
I see.
And so it's really a complex interplay then between the context of the relationship, the context of the particular message, the geometric form which has a particular ideographic function, the colors which have a system of. Not only this system exists, but this was one system of binary color symbolism, and then you have to put this all together in a very nuanced way to sort of interpret a message, and that message could also have many layers.
So traditionally, you would have this bead work.
Yeah.
I suppose you might call it a writing system. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you'd have this form of communication, which is strongly related to color, or it requires colors to work.
Yeah, but not only, you know, there's a number of complex symbologies in the region, and the beadwork one was one of them, and then there was a mural art form, which was called ditima. Ditima, that's a Sotho, for example, Sotho ditima. Ditima means inscriptions, chapters, characters, letters. Ditima is and it comes from the word lema, which means to cultivate.
Right.
So, which is we were speaking about at the conference, it's quite similar to the words in ancient Egyptian.
For like a ditch or something, being related to the word for writing, because both of them are like a line.
Sure, but also like in terms of all the connotations of it. You know, like I think I mentioned this as a comment in the conference, is that like it's also the idea of planting, of seasons, of cycles, of meaning growing, of feeding people through these things, of sacrifice. You know, all the associations of agriculture, for example. You know, I think that also plays into the connotations of the meaning of the thing. So ditima is quite a very rich and broad term. And the full name for the writing system, ditima tsa dinuku. Dinuku has syllables. So it's saying syllabic tima. The tima that is syllabic.
Oh.
And even
because it's a syllabic writing system that you... Hang on.
Yeah, so if you understand it, each character, it works similar to Korean Hangul in that each character is a syllable block that contains like phonological features inside it. So it's divided into these syllable blocks, and you can also see further into the structure of language in terms of the phonology and phonetics of a language in its actual linguistic structure through the visual representation.
So to sort of like dumb it down a bit, like it's basically a series of what to me look like equilateral triangles rotated in various directions and with various lines through them in different directions or in different positions. And the rotation of the triangles indicates the vowel. And then the lines through them or the extra little circles inside them and stuff indicate other phonetic information like what consonant is there and so on.
Or what consonantal feature.
Or what consonantal feature.
Or what vocalization feature, for example. But
which makes it highly systematic, actually. As a writing system, I'd say, to me, it looks like, I mean, my feeling is that it's the most systematic writing system I've ever seen. Like it's got a real degree, there's a lot of linguistic sophistication there.
Yeah.
A lot of linguistic sophistication. It's very beautiful, really, in its design. Because Hangul is also like widely kind of loved for the way the Korean writing system. Hangul is widely loved for the sort of degree of linguistic insight that went into creating it. But I feel like this goes a step further because, I mean, perhaps you can tell us more about the details, but you know, the way that you decide like what is a k versus a g sound and a t versus a d sound, you have a specific do you have like a specific voicing mark?
Yeah, there's a voicing mark. It's called upimbo, and essentially it is and this is also, it's not only equilateral triangles. It can be any triangle where you can see a clear base and a clear apex. Even something that's not a triangle, you can even imagine, as long as there's a directionality, because the rotationality of it is important. Because if you rotate the character, it changes the vowel quality.
So I should say it's not that it is necessary that they're equilateral. It's just that's normally the way I've seen it written.
What we need to do something about that, because it's not the case for the wider forms of inscriptions.
Yeah. So if you didn't use equilateral triangles, you could still write it and it'll be fine.
Yeah, but for example, the tessellated forms where we combine these syllable blocks into larger blocks to actually create like word blocks and stuff, those you necessarily have to use isosceles triangles. You can't use equilateral triangles.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because they don't tessellate in the same way.
Right.
And that's that's nice geometry point about it, which also goes deep into the cultural nuance of it.
It seems like there's a lot of room, aside from all the other things about this script, it seems like there's a lot of room for kind of like font slash not graffiti, but like kind of art, right? Calligraphy. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Like calligraphy, but also sort of in future, maybe there can be lots of different fonts based on, and things like you normally have italic and bold and so on. I feel there's lots of opportunities for like to change this angle, you know, change the height and width and whatever of the
and it's
I'm not sure what to call them, the triangles.
It's fundamental to the cultural world of the system, because the large part or a very important strand of it is mural art, which is called umkwalo in isiNdebele or ditima in Sesotho. Umkwalo, it literally means writing. Ukwala means to write. And umkwalo is a very famous tradition now in the world because of the likes of Gogo Esther Mahlangu, who became this very famous Ndebele artist with her imikwalo, all the traditional geometric and color mural art that uses a lot of triangular forms. I mean, I guess the triangle is the canonical feature of it, but it has a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of meaning in those works. They're not just decoration, although it's also a secret thing. It is a secret system of meaning, because it is a feminine art. It's something that is conveyed from grandmother to granddaughter, and you're not supposed to know it unless you were initiated like that. So it has a certain cryptocultural quotient in it as well. Let me say it like that.
So this is you're talking here about the traditional kind of script, but then there's also now this sort of, I don't know what to call it, like a modern variant. Or something.
It is a modern phonetic codification of the same tradition.
Right.
So what we have is essentially a democratized phonetic writing system that is based on and still contains in it an older ideographic tradition that is conveyed through, as we've spoken about, beadwork, and now we've spoken about mural art, but also other forms of crafts like basketry and beadwork. Basketry and pottery and things like that. And also sand drawings as well. That's also an important strand in it. And also, I would say, physical scarification as well. There's a tradition of that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sort of like tattoos.
Yeah, but tattoos but you don't use an ink. It's more like you're creating a scar.
Yeah.
Which is a common thing in Southern Africa. Yeah, it's very common as a cultural, often as an identity marker, that you come from a certain place, you come from a certain heritage. Now you must signify that you've passed a certain initiation through that, and sometimes people on people's faces,
Yeah.
you sometimes see like that, and it. Certain traditions and certain areas will have their particular symbols that are like that, as well. So there's all of that in the entire cultural worldview of the way that isiPeqe comes from. But like many modern indigenous African scripts, there is sort of like a imperative for like a democratization of the system, so that it can be used functionally as an alternative literacy. So we see the same thing with CBD, which is in the region of what's now Nigeria, the Neon CBD project. We see it in Morocco with the Neo Tifinagh projects, and we see it in Sudan with Zahrawa Beria. We see it in Malawi with Mwangwego, Mandombe in Congo. We see it in Kenya with Luo script, the Lakeside script. We see it in, all of our contexts in our endangered writing networks are people that work in these different traditions, and there's this sense that, like, in order for us to reclaim our own agency in a context of, let's say, maybe in a colonial context where we're trying to decentralize the focus on the colony and the colonial modes to re-centralize traditional indigenous or African modes, it is now like a tool to create democratized writing systems that we can use as alternative literacies. So I think isiPeqe, we sort of, I think I mostly promote isiPeqe as an alternative literacy that is rooted in an ancient tradition, and that can be seen as a resource for us to re-centralize our own epistemologies. Let me say that.
Do you have a sense of the usership at the moment?
Some people are doing research into that, but I don't know. I see. For me, I'm always surprised by how many people know the script. I'm. It's not really an interest for me to do that research, but I think there are people who are starting to do that, and I think through our networks as well, it's becoming documented just ordinarily. Like, we just have certain groups, like a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group or something like that, where just more and more people join and more people show the work they've done and the communities that they've been working in, where they come from, that they use these things, So it's like more and more we're seeing the stretch of the script, but it's by no means well known in South Africa. I would say it's known to people who are interested in this kind of discourse.
Right.
Which I think is the case with most minority or all minority writing systems. Is that it's only known to us, people who are interested in this kind of discourse, which essentially also has this sort of like ethic of like transformation and paradigm shift and things like that. I think that's why I find these to be wholesome spaces that we're involved in, because there's a general ethic and a collectivity around we're changing a paradigm here. We're trying to shift the terms of the world in what we're doing. And I think those are the kind of ways of thinking where people might be aware of this. So anyone who's in that way of thinking, probably who's looked into Southern African symbologies, will definitely be aware of Ispekle and Ditima, I would say. But the aim is like through our colleague Oreen Yusuf, who's got a number of African indigenous scripts into the Unicode. I think there's a very good possibility, inshallah, certainty that we will get Ispekle into Unicode in the next 4 or 5 years or so, because we have enough evidence of user base for that, and enough content for that. And then we've got the willing parties to do the encoding and these kinds of things.
I've heard that in terms of writing on the computer at the moment, some people are using a kind of system which actually creates images.
Yes,
images get sent.
Yeah, in fact, that's housed on the ispekle.org.za website, which I've been managing for some time, although I don't update it enough, or haven't updated it since like 2020, but I should update it, or maybe some others who in our networks can start to help there, because we have an open sourced HTML-based application there, where you can just you can either click on your particular characters that you want to write, or you can use the keyboard with a particular layout that was quite well devised, that you can type, and then it produces an image file, and you can, and we I think a lot of people use that application to make texts online as images. It produces as a PNG.
So you end up, instead of having the actual font of this, because there is no kind of font of it right now, there's no Unicode for it right now, you just essentially have a picture of it and you can send it as a message.
Send it as a picture, or like, in these messaging apps like WhatsApp, you can make stickers, and we make thousands of stickers, so you can communicate common phrases and stuff with stickers, and we do that a lot. So we do use it as like a everyday script. But we would necessarily use it in those ways, like we're using stickers and images and stuff. So it's still, there is this thing of like, there's no like computer text in it. But I think we'll get there. But also, I mean, some of the things that we heard at the conference is like, maybe that's not the goal and the prize to do that. Maybe there are other ways of engaging writing that is not through that rigid idea. It must now be text that are also worthwhile to pursue, which I think our colleague Kevin was presenting about was quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you want to add, I feel like we've spoken about all the different main things we want to talk about. The one thing about, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, the
so it's a dental click with a velar release. So that's a correct.
Philosophical theory and cosmogony. So you mentioned, I feel like this one line is worth repeating. I just remember you saying this at the conference, that this is, you think of this like the Plato of maybe, I don't know what to say, the Sintu peoples, or like...
No, we can just say this of a Southern African region, maybe, or what we might call Azania and Ngaremap. Those are like some old traditional words for the regions.
So it's like there's a 19th century set of documents about which I don't remember who wrote them down, but they're written down 19th century documents from an elder of that time, to explain the central ideas of his worldview.
Sure. Well, it was just by happenstance, because the story is that Lucy Lloyd was this sort of linguist who was more interested in folklore, sort of like a folklorist who had a skill as a linguist and quite a reasonably good phonetician, who was the relative of W.H.I. Bleek, who is a very famous linguist, like one of the most famous linguists of all Western linguistics, who was the person who like documented most of what he actually coined the term Bantu languages. So we have him to blame for that. But he did a good work as a linguist, even though there's these problematic positionality things, of course. So Lucy Lloyd applied to the colonial government in Cape Town at the time to have a certain number of prisoners released from the Breakwater prison, which is a prison that no longer exists, but the place exists in Cape Town, Breakwater. It's like a parking garage now and a hospital and stuff, I think. But those people were arrested because they were so-called San or so-called Bushman people that were accused of stock theft, which means they were just living in a normal way, doing the things that has been done for many millennia. And they were arrested. At the time, there was also certain things where you could there was like bounty hunters for people because they were considered like pests.
Oh, wow.
So now you can kill people and bring them and say, and claim a reward for that. There were certain things like that at some point. But in this case, there was like people were rounded up from far afield and brought to this prison. And so because they were people from far afield who were speakers of languages like Tram and Kung, this linguist being in Cape Town and those areas being so far away, like almost impossible to get to without like a very arduous journey and that you would never have the funds or the means to get there. This was the opportunity for this person to speak to people who knew these languages and these folkloric traditions. So she applied to get people released in house arrest into her house which was in Mowbray, a suburb of Cape Town. And basically, she learned the languages and she basically interviewed people and just wrote everything down verbatim in the language with a phonetic transcription that she devised. Or that I think also a number of those linguists of that time devised. And so we have all these pages of her notebooks, which it so happened, one of the informants, one of the people she interviewed and who gave her discourses, happened to be a great sage by the name of Tabo or Tuidoro. And this person was a Kwagatricha, which means a water diviner. Someone who is skilled in the arts and craft of divination through the person of water. And I say the person of water because water is considered Kwa is a person. And this person was also extremely well versed in many astronomical details, all details of folklore, culture, scientific explanations of agricultural principles, or any kind of ecological principles, explaining these things in Kham terms. And she recorded all of these things. And for me, I really was very let me say motivated by engaging with this archive, especially because in it, I believe there is a quite distilled theory of sign inside there. So a theory of sign, as we find in de Saussure, famously, but also the Saussurian theory of sign predates Saussure. It goes back to like Aristotle and whatever. And even it goes in China, you've got theories of sign before Confucian times. You'll correct the pronunciation, but Xunzi?
I'm not so on top of all the philosophers.
Okay, anyway.
I haven't heard of that specific person.
I probably did. I can't even.
Like my knowledge of Chinese philosophy is not super. It's not super deep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but in my sort of theoretical framework for this research about secret language, about isiShalambombo, I'm framing it with Tabo as representing a tradition of classics of Southern Africa. It has hitherto not been thought of in those terms, but I think it's clear candidate for that. Is that the same way we think of Confucian thought, the same way we think of Platonic thought, Aristotelian, tradition and whatever. Here's Tabo's thought. Here's a Tram cosmogenic framework. Here's a Tram intellectual palette. And these things can be used as a as a style and as a tradition, as a paradigm for doing all sorts of work, whether it be in any field, arts or sciences or phenomenology or any kind of philosophical engagement. All of these things can use this as a classics, just in the way that Plato and Aristotle and Socrates or whatever are used as a general Western sort of like baseline of like, we go back to these things. I always use the example of, you use the word tragedy in English very commonly, and tragedy is like, everyone knows the word tragedy, and you use it in the theater with tragedy as a particular form. You understand what a tragedy is, as opposed to a tragic thing, as opposed to a tragic versus pathos versus comedy. You know these terms if you study theater or something like that. But tragedy is from like words that essentially mean the goat song.
Oh, what?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in ancient Greek, one ancient Greek tradition, there's this folkloric element of the person who delivers that is the character who is the goat or the fawn or whatever it is. I don't remember the specific type of creature it is. That's the one who's giving that discourse, which is the tragic monologue or something like that. And it's associated with that. So embedded in everyday terminology, embedded in the way we talk about any normal concept in Western modernity is a particular folkloric tradition that is based in like these Greek things. And it's like, we don't even question like, okay, cool, that's fine. But like, notice that and say like, well, we also, in South Africa, we also have our own traditions like that.
Yeah.
Why don't we also just talk about our stuff with those kind of terms?
No, absolutely.
Absolutely, so that's the sort of intervention, is to say, this is our classics. Let's build a theoretical framework that doesn't defer to a Western paradigm, that uses this paradigm, and then we can engage the world. We can engage all the Western things from this paradigm. So essentially, it's I'll mention my colleague Kalane Lekhanya Tsikare, who mentions this word botufatsa. So the word Ubuntu in Sesotho is botu, and this is the philosophy of relational personhood. This umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, a person is a person through people. With the suffix fatsa, it means like the doing of it. So it's like active philosophy in practice. Make that philosophy living, do it. So we see this work as Ubuntu. Instead of saying it's decolonization, it's decoloniality, because that still puts the focus on the colonial epistemology. You're saying you're doing something that's not that or against that. Rather, let's say we're doing the thing that we're coming with, Ubuntu. This is necessarily decolonial, but we don't necessarily even have to say it, because we became so adverse to the word decolonial in South Africa intellectual spaces, because it became like this sort of like, everyone was using it and they were using it very like weakly, and it became like a sort of, it became like a dog whistle for people who were just trying to look like they're progressive. So now it's like, what do we actually do to really activate, a transformative impulse on the ground? And we say,
as you were saying that, I just made a very strange connection. So you mentioned this idea of philosophy being something that you need to actively do on the ground. It brought up, I haven't thought about this for years and years, but there's a well, I don't know exactly how to call this person. I'm going to call him a Polish author called Czesław Miłosz. He was a philosopher also. I think he won the Nobel Prize for Literature at some point. But he actually was in the States for a while also as a kind of I think he was at some university there at some point. So in one of his books, he mentions an inspiration from when he was young, like another philosopher, or like another colleague or someone who he was friends with, and would talk about philosophy. And the thing that he sort of learned about from this guy, or the kind of attitude he gained, was that where other philosophers would talk about things in dry intellectual terms, this other person who Czesław Miłosz learned from would be like, anytime anyone would have a philosophical point of view or like an argument, this person would try and figure out what the implications of that philosophy is by acting the philosophy out. So it'd be like, okay, so that's your argument. So what does it mean to live your argument. You know,
I
what is
love
it?
that.
And that's what Czesław Miłosz was saying. And the next thing that I thought when I thought that now is that, you know, the next thing you start talking about is the way that people talk about decolonial, or the use of this term, and you know, how it perhaps it's not always the term we should be using or whatever. But the in Czesław Miłosz's case, perhaps the biggest kind of work that he's done in his life was wow, I realized this analogy has actually got a lot of legs to it. So one thing is that he called himself the last citizen of the Duchy of Lithuania, or Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So just very, very briefly, in Polish history, Poland and Lithuania joined together peacefully into a larger country. It was essentially a kind of like a part marriage alliance and part sort of alliance in the face of like both countries were under threat. So they decided to join together. And then it was kind of this legal gray area where on the one hand, it was two countries. On the other hand, it was one country. I suppose maybe a little bit similar to how like England and Wales have a little, perhaps you could say, right? But there's a clear dominant one in that case. There was a sense in which there's a kind of a sense in which Poland was the dominant one between those two. But you had this kind of linking together where and they used to call it just Rzeczpospolita, or Rzeczpospolita Obojga Narodów, which means the Republic, or the Republic of two nations, right? So it was kind of like joined together into this larger thing. So that came apart so you know, this whole sort of double country was conquered in 1795 by neighboring empires. But Czesław Miłosz was from the 20th century, and he considered himself to be a citizen of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, so like the Lithuanian sort of half of this. Speaking Polish, I don't think he actually knew Lithuanian, but he sort of thought of himself in this complex way in terms of identity, that like people who call me Polish are calling me the wrong thing. People who call me Lithuanian are calling me the wrong thing. Like I am a Polish-speaking person from this sort of historical context, and the reason I say that I feel that's relevant is because there's a degree of like refusing labels that other people are offering because you have your own sense of identity and who you really are, which is more complex and layered than other people's labels will allow for, and doesn't always reflect current political realities. Yeah. It's like I have my own history, you know, and he kind of annoyed everyone by doing that because he was like, I'm not Polish, and Paul's like, come on, you know, we want to count you among Polish like Nobel laureates, but he's like, well, I'm sorry, I can't, even though he's writing in Polish and everything, he's like, I can't accept the label, So another thing I wanted to say is that he was writing a lot about communism in Poland and just in the sort of kind of east side of the Iron Curtain world, and he was talking about and about like the social kind of and what it means to live under that system and the kind of social effects it has and the language it uses and not to get too deep into it, but from a Polish perspective, it's viewed quite a lot more as kind of like essentially Russian imperialism rather than like specifically it was like the system itself. I mean, there was the system, but it's like a system that Poland didn't choose. Like Polish people didn't choose it. It was like enforced from the side of Russia. So there is. I mean, we don't use the word colonialism for it, but there is this sense of like it was a system that came from outside and dominated Polish society in a way that was like we could not accept. As like, this is not the way that we want to live, but we're forced to under this regime. And then he was like trying to understand like by expressing it, by putting it into words, he was trying to help also Westerners understand like, what is it like to be in a system where, you know, he would say that like, there was a lot of reading between the lines in what people said because there was a lot of censorship and you had to kind of, anyway, like I don't want to get into all of it, but he's basically saying that there's a lot of ways in which this system worked, which by being able to express it and talk about it to people, it was partly a way of kind of cleansing oneself and being like, I don't want to, like, I realize that I'm influenced by this system, but I don't want to identify with the system in the long term. I want to be able to like break through it, but also I want to express to other people what it's like. I would never have made this connection with Czesław Miłosz unless you said exactly whatever words you said that made me think of him. And now I'm thinking like there's a lot of points of comparison, actually.
Absolutely, and it's very affirming to hear it, because it's the spirit with which I was brought up. You understand that there is a certain paradigm that is essentially the tool of the oppressor, and you must understand very well the tool of the oppressor, and you must understand its terms, because you have to live in those terms, but you don't have to take those terms into yourself. You must resist those terms in yourself, for your own self, for your own dignity. You must make sure that you resist that oppressive naming, categorization, the vicissitudes of those identity categories that are enforced from above and that are enforced often through violence. You don't have to buy into it just because you have to live in it. You know what I mean? It's like you can live in another way, and in that way you influence others to live in that way. You influence each other, and you on the ground change the paradigm for yourselves.
But how much does it change the paradigm, and how much is it like come back to a pre-existing paradigm?
Exactly. In fact, you've stated it. I'll make a mistake in saying that. You've stated it correctly. That's the Butufatsa principle. Is that you're not challenging the colonialism. What you're doing is reclaiming and reestablishing one's own epistemology and way of being that is necessarily decolonial.
Literally, the more you speak about this, the more analogies I see. I don't know if I'm stretching things too far by saying this, but really, like, I almost feel like I understand it better because I can understand it through almost like, I don't know how to put this, but almost like through Polish eyes. I don't know, it sounds a bit funny, but...
It sounds right.
But like, so for another example of a thing is that how there was, this is a historical thing, but throughout the history of Western Europe, okay, where there was this idea about like monarchies and republics. Like you're either a monarchy or you're a republic. A monarchy is one kind of system, a republic is another kind of system, right? And then everyone could kind of slot everyone into this paradigm. They're like, Netherlands, that's a republic. Am I getting that right? But like, whatever. Like, and then you had constitutional monarchy and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not actually a historian of this exactly, but like my understanding is like generally it was like in the past in Europe, people were saying like, there are these two systems and they're comparing them as separate systems.
Sure.
The Polish political system didn't fit into that.
Yeah.
And it vexed their categories.
Yeah.
And what they ended up doing is not talking about Poland. Right? Because Poland was like considered, even though it was like, you could, depending on how you talk about it, it was an important place, but in some ways it wasn't an important place, I suppose. And so they just decided not to talk about, they were just like, oh, well, that's just weird. We're just not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was like an elected monarchy with a voting system where 10% of the population could vote. And it was like sort of partial. They called it a republic, but there was a king, but the king wasn't very powerful. It was like, what is this, right? And they were like, well, I'm just not gonna think about that, right? And I guess that's another thing where it's like it's a different political system. It works in a different way. The society is different for it.
Yeah.
But people would just be like, no, I'm just going to maintain my categories and ignore this exception.
Yeah.
Which I know this is perhaps a bit of a stretch, but I'm feeling like it feels like it applies, right? It feels like people are coming in and saying, well, you need to live on this land and you need to have a nation because that's the way politics works. You have a nation, you have a language, you have this prescribed piece of land.
Yes.
And you're like, that's not our political system. That's not our society.
Yeah.
But then they don't understand. Instead of being like, let's change the way we think about how sort of society and politics works, they're like, no, we're just going to keep thinking the way we think. And we're just going to ignore like your different way of doing things because it doesn't.
And we're going to also force
well, on top of that, force, I suppose,
Yeah. No, it's a perfect analogy. I think that to see it through Polish eyes is a correct methodology.
Because I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't coming into this thinking like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to see it through the perspective of my own, like completely different context.
I think you have to. I mean, that's where we can find the commonality as well, because these are shared experiences. This is a shared relationality, and it's like, okay, we'll get closer to what this actually is if we look at it, which I guess is also linguistics. You need to compare widely. Otherwise, you're not doing the work of linguistics. Now you're becoming a language specialist and not a linguist.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't be claiming to be a linguist and then you're only looking at these categories of languages. No, a linguist must know the abstraction of the thing, and you must know your data must be broad. When it comes to like linguistic comparison and these kind of things, like when you're talking about a particular feature of language, it should apply. You should see the same thing across the world. If you're talking, for example. So I think also there's a case as well. Like for me, if I look at, I was speaking about this with Helen. If I look at Shinto in Japan and the traditions of what is the meaning of kami and all the traditions of ancestry as an important living spiritual paradigm in our lives, it's very similar to how we interpret our metaphysics traditionally in South Africa, right? Like we are living, according to that metaphysics, which resembles the Japanese one, and I mean, you find that in other places in the world. It's like these commonalities is how you start to detach from the identity quotient of these things, and you start to really engage them for what they are. So you start living them instead of demonstrating them. And I think that's the thing. It's so often like when it comes to especially endangered things or minority things, there's a lot of demonstrativeness about it. It's like
What do you mean by demonstrative?
like it's an index for particular politics instead of being used as a resource. It's like okay, let me put it in these terms. I'll frame it in terms of I think this is the work of Kathleen Huur, who's a linguist who did work in policy and language policy and planning in South Africa. I could be wrong about this, but that's how I remember. And there was this like 3 levels of language policy strategies. It's like the first one is the kind of like very conservative, often associated with the right-wing politics of language is a problem. You need to fix it. There's a problem. We have a problem with language. It means a lot of languages here. People speak that. We need to fix it. Let's fix the problem. Second one is like language as a right. People must have the right to speak their own language. This is when I say it's demonstrative. You're demonstrating that you believe in egalitarianism, where this person's language and this person's language must all have space and be. Then the third one is like, for me, the more progressive way of thinking is to say language is a resource. Use the thing. We need to see the thing as a resource. We need to be able to use it and make it and create with it. That these things are valuable, not because they're associated, because they're associated with certain identities and particular communities, but also because those things can be used by us, all of us, especially when we identify with the, certain cultural idioms, but in general, for technologies, for science, for, all sorts of artistic expression, this is useful. It's like I always say, for example, when I express the concept of Ubuntu, when I'm trying to explain it, maybe in an academic context, I would prefer to use the Xitsonga word vumunu, because vumunu in its structure actually contains more of what the thing means. Because vumunu, it has munu. Munu means a person. It's the Xitsonga equivalent of vumuntu or mutu. Munu. Vumunu means the distilled or concentrated abstract of person. So personness. Whereas Ubuntu, that the mu that actually contains is the prefix of person. Everything that has mu and ba, that's to do with people. That is sort of obscured in the word moto or muntu. It's just underneath. It's whereas it's laid explicit by bumunu or bumuntu in Kikongo, for example, bumuntu, right? Bumuntu, and for me, I use that word as a resource. I don't say Xitsonga because it's like a pragmatic thing of identity. Like, people speak Xitsonga, that's why I must use Xitsonga. I'm going to use the Xitsonga word because it's better. I'm going to use the French word here. It's better for this concept. I want to use the Polish word here. It's better.
Yeah.
It's a resource. We use the Polish concept. See through the Polish eyes. It's better.
That's a really interesting framing. You know what I mean? I've thought about what the value of language, kind of what the value of language is, and I do like what you're saying.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of people try to justify language, things like language revitalization. A lot of people justify it by talking about, like, I sometimes don't like it when people justify it for this reason. I'll give you an analogy.
Yeah.
They'll say something like, imagine that someone is, I don't know, someone's going to die, someone's starving to death.
Yeah.
And you have to justify why we should feed them, right? I mean, most people would say everyone should be fed because they're a person, right? But like one way, you know, perhaps that's kind of elephant in the room with this analogy, but like putting that one aside, right? Mm-hmm. One way of justifying it is, we need to keep this person because like this person is they have some valuable job. Like they, you know, if it were, you know, they are, I don't know, they're like
important.
They're a cancer researcher. They're like making breakthroughs on cancer research, or like, you know, or they are, you know, they you know, they're a bus driver. Without them, we won't have enough to drive the bus, right? Like whatever. You just use their job to say like this person is valuable because look, they're doing a job. Whereas another way of saying it is like this person is valuable because they're my mother, right? But I don't really care that doesn't speak to you. I don't care that she's not your mother. She's my mother. Like she matters to me.
Exactly.
Right. And I kind of feel like a lot of the conversation, sorry, there's a weird analogy, but like a lot of the conversation around like what is valuable about languages focuses on like, oh, it's doing a job. But I'm like, it means something to someone, right? That's part of what I'm doing on this podcast.
That's why
like,
it's a resource.
I'm trying to bring people here and say like, what does the language mean? What is it in your heart, right? Because people can see that it means something to that person. It means someone to that community. Maybe it doesn't mean anything to you. And I don't expect it to mean something to you. I don't think it has to mean something to you. Like, but it means something to someone, and you deserve to know that. You deserve to realize how much it can mean to someone and how deep it can be in someone's heart. And that's why, even though this person is, you know, paid a low wage or something, if they're someone's mother, let's, you know, have some respect, or let's, you know. That's kind of how I feel. In analogy, that's kind of how I feel about it.
You said it. You said it. I appreciate it. You said it. Yeah. It's nothing to add to that. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if it's important to that person, that should be important to you, because things are important to you as well. And why is it important to that person? You know, like there is something in there that, you know, you would be foolish not to relate to. You know, it's like someone loves something. Why do they love that thing? And why would you have to justify that thing outside of that? That is good enough.
I guess it's almost like saying someone else's house is on fire, and like most people don't care because their own house is never going to catch fire because it's completely inflammable, like completely not flammable. Like but what I'm using an analogy here is that like English isn't going to die out in the next like 500 years, right? Nobody can imagine a situation where there's no more English anymore. So if you're an English speaker, it's kind of impossible to imagine what it means that your language might be threatened. So it just means that like you can't even imagine a house being on fire because like your house is made of glass or something. I don't know. It can't catch fire, right? But then someone else's house is catching fire, right? And then you're like, you can't even imagine what that is like. And I mean, at some level, you don't even value your house for being a physical structure because you're like, but my house is impervious to all damage ever. So this analogy is terrible.
No, but I think also this is another thing. If you start thinking that my language is English and that one is your language and that one is your language and that one is your language, I think you're missing the point, because no one's language is English. If you are a person who believes like what you're saying, that if something is important to someone, it's important, then that's your language. It's your language. I will always say that as an African, to say everything that is African is my thing. I can't say this belongs to someone. It belongs to us if we are Africans. Because to be an African is to identify with that thing. To be someone who believes that something is important to someone, that means it's important, then that's your thing as well. You know, it's like I can't now sit and say Polish is not my language. No, the way you've expressed this, you know, from the Polish eyes, I say it's me. I say Polish is me as well. I will identify with Polish because the way you've expressed it, I identify with that. And it's like,
This is back to the resource thing about you can use other people's
but
ways
it's not
of expression
other people's.
to
It's ours. it's about, if you say other people, you're creating a duality, and that's a mind-body duality. It's the same duality, the self and other duality. That's why it's il faut édifier le monde de toi. The other is you. You are me. You are me. The only me is you. So the only time that I am going to really be real about what's going on here is if I let myself disappear and see myself actually only as the product of this interaction. So in that interaction, I believe and I can feel that I must identify with you completely. I must identify with the you. I must identify with it because that's the truth of the relation. So if one is working in the reclamation of indigenous languages, all indigenous languages, those are our languages. All the indigenous languages are ours because we were doing that. We believe that that's important. So it's ours. If I now Speckles of Shambo is important, Vai script is important, Dongba is important. Dongba is not someone else's script that belongs to, Nashi people. Those are the people that hold that knowledge, who are elders that I should defer to. But it's mine as well. I'm not going to say Dongba is not mine because I believe in it. I'll claim it because we're doing that work together. That Dongba creates me. And without it, that relation, I'm fooling myself, So I think that's how I would interpret it. That kind of thing is that I would always ask people to traverse the abyssal line between the being and the non-being, the self and the not self. Go to the not self. Go to that which is not me. Because that is where all self and all the world is. It's what we were saying in our talk, the horror, the void, the space of that which is not, that which produces the context for everything to be. So I think it's like one must always identify, with the most ultimate of the other. I think that's a deeper way of saying that, which I think is the Black existentialist tradition. I think it's talking to Fanon, it's talking to Aimé Césaire, it's talking to Orlando Patterson, it's talking to Frank Wilderson and Saidiya Hartman and all of these things. I think that tradition is part of this debate, and we can never. I'll just do the name dropping thing there to just put a footnote to this. And I think because I always would like to engage that discourse, which is a scholarly discourse as well, which has to do with ontologies of being, ontologies of being. Yeah, and I would say the non-ontology and non-ontology, and ontocide and deontologizing, because it's all about what we are allowing to. What is the geography of thought, like I was saying, when it comes to what exists and who I am in relation to this thing, or who you are in relation to this thing. So if I need to look through Polish eyes, I'll have to look through those eyes as well. I'll have to look through the Polish eyes, and I'll have to learn from you and be your student to understand those Polish eyes properly, so that I can also look through them effectively, Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Sure.
Wow, that's powerful. I feel honored. I feel like I have some, I'm learning as much as I can from you. So
yeah, I know we're all each other's students. That's why I like the idea of peer learning. That's the School of Commerce thing. You learn with your friends. Like my methodology is friendship. That's the methodology that I'm using. It's like we must be together as friends, because that thing is going to produce the most, feeling that opens up the world more. Like it just opens up. It's so much more when you all know that the real talk is with your friend. It's not like a secret that everyone knows the real talk is your friend. So if you wanted to do real talk when it comes to like serious intellectual topics or like matters of like nation and politics and all these things, it's like those are the things we must do with your friend, So I want my colleagues to be my friends because that's how we're going to do better work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think we're going to have to be finishing up. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Pule. Thanks so much. And this has been Polyglot World Languages, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Polyglot World Languages podcast. My company, Polyglot Languages, makes learning resources, including language learning apps, for lower resourced languages. Our mission is to make high-quality learning resources for as many languages as we can, treating each language and culture with the respect it deserves. We use a combination of linguistics, the science of learning, and our own decades of experience learning and teaching languages to produce highly effective apps and other products to teach exactly the kinds of languages you hear about on this podcast. You can find out more about our work by visiting our website at www.polyglotlanguages.com. I hope you have a great day.